Hello, everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still can't believe what happened that summer at my friend Jeremy's aunt and uncle's farm. It's been 8 months, and I still wake up in cold sweats hearing those screams. I'm not some conspiracy nut or someone who was looking for this kind of experience. I was just helping out a friend. Jeremy called me last June, asking if I wanted to make some extra cash watching his aunt and uncle's farm while they went to Poland for a wedding. I was between jobs and needed the money, so I said yes, without thinking twice. The farm was near Puyallup, Washington, about 35 miles south of Seattle. I'd never been there before, but Jeremy described it as peaceful countryside with views of Mount Rainier on clear days. When I arrived, Jeremy gave me the tour. His Aunt Rose and Uncle Mark, yeah, we share the same name, which got confusing, had this beautiful little farm where they grew hops and barley for local breweries, plus they had these amazing berry bushes everywhere. But the main business was Aunt Rose's goat milk products, soaps, lotions, cheeses, all made from milk from her 8 alpine goats. The property was gorgeous, about 15 acres with a farmhouse, a big red barn, and rolling pastures surrounded by dense forest. The house sat on a hill overlooking everything, and you could see Mount Rainier looming in the distance. I remember thinking how perfect it all seemed. Jeremy and I split up the responsibilities. He'd handled the milking since he'd done it before, and I'd managed the small farm store where locals came to buy Aunt Rose's products. They also had 2 border collies, Buster and Sadie, who were supposed to help with the goats, but mostly just wanted belly rubs. The day after I arrived, Jeremy showed me this weird emergency drill Aunt Rose had established. Apparently she was terrified of lahars, these massive mud flows that can come down from volcanoes like Rainier. She trained the goats to run into this stock trailer whenever they heard emergency sirens. Jeremy demonstrated by playing a siren sound on his phone, and sure enough, those goats bolted straight for the trailer. It seemed excessive to me at the time, but later, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. The first 5 days were completely normal. We'd wake up early, Jeremy would milk the goats, I'd set up the farm store from 10 to 4, we'd have dinner, maybe have a couple beers on the porch, and call it a night. The dogs would usually sleep outside on the porch since it was summer and they liked to keep watch over the property. Then things started getting weird. It was our 6th night there. We were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset. Usually Buster and Sadie would be running around the yard or lying at our feet, but that evening they were acting strange. They kept whining to go inside the house, which was unusual because they loved being outdoors, especially at dusk when they'd watch for rabbits. "What's wrong with you guys?" Jeremy asked them, but they just kept pouring at the door. We finally let them in, thinking maybe they were tired or not feeling well. We stayed out another hour before heading to bed. I remember having trouble sleeping that night, kept hearing what sounded like something moving around outside, branches breaking in the distance. I figured it was deer, or maybe a bear. The property backed up to dense forest, and wildlife wasn't uncommon. The next morning is when we realized something was wrong. Jeremy went out to round up the goats for milking, but came running back to the house. "Pumpkin's missing," he said, referring to one of the goats. We spent an hour searching the property before finally finding her hiding in the stock trailer. She wouldn't come out, even when Jeremy shook the grain bucket, which usually brought all the goats running. When we finally coaxed her out, she was shaking and skittish, not at all like her usual friendly self. While checking the rest of the property, we noticed something else strange. All the blackberry bushes along the forest edge had been stripped clean. Not just a few berries missing, but every single one gone, and some of the branches were broken like something heavy had leaned on them. "Bears," Jeremy suggested, but it didn't feel right. Bears would have damaged more than just the berries, and they wouldn't have been so thorough. That night, We decided to lock the barn door, something Aunt Rose and Uncle Mark apparently never did. The goats seemed nervous, huddling together instead of spreading out in their stalls. The dogs refused to go outside at all, even to do their business. We had to practically drag them out, and they did their thing as quickly as possible before scratching frantically at the door to get back in. We went to bed around 11. I was almost asleep when the screaming started. It's hard to describe the sound. It was like a goat bleating, but mixed with this horrible shrieking noise. I bolted upright in bed as Jeremy burst into my room. "The barn," was all he said before we both ran downstairs. The dogs were going absolutely insane, barking and howling, but they wouldn't go near the door. We grabbed flashlights and Jeremy's uncle's shotgun, which wasn't loaded because we couldn't find the shells, and ran outside toward the barn. The screaming had stopped by the time we got halfway across the yard, but then we heard something else. A deep, guttural sound that wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a growl or a roar, more like this weird, throaty vocalization that made the hair on my neck stand up. Our flashlights caught the barn door, or what was left of it. The entire thing had been wrenched off its hinges, and then we saw it. Standing in the doorway was this massive, dark figure. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, covered in what looked like dark, matted fur. In its arms was one of the goats, Coco, I think, thrashing wildly. We froze, completely froze. The thing turned toward us, and I caught a glimpse of its face in the flashlight beam. It wasn't a bear. It had this flat, wide nose and deep-set eyes that reflected the light like a deer's. For a split second, we just stared at each other. Then Jeremy screamed, "Hey!" and lurched forward like he was going to charge it, which was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. The creature made this horrible sound, like a cross between a bark and a roar, and started moving toward the forest, with the goat still struggling in its arms. Something clicked in my brain then. "The trailer!" I shouted. "Get the goats in the trailer!" I ran back to the house for the truck keys, while Jeremy raced to the barn to round up the remaining goats. By some miracle, Aunt Rose's training kicked in, and when Jeremy started shouting and making noise, the goats bolted for the stock trailer that was always kept hitched to the old farm truck. I got to the truck, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Jeremy was herding the last goat into the trailer when I pulled up. He slammed the trailer door shut and jumped in the passenger seat. "Go! Go! Go!" he was screaming. I floored it, the tires spinning in the gravel before catching. As we started moving, there was a tremendous thud against the back of the trailer. In the rearview mirror, I could see it. The creature had latched onto the trailer's bumper and was being dragged behind us. "It's on the trailer!" I yelled. Jeremy turned around to look through the back window and started swearing. "Don't stop! Don't stop!" I took the curves in the driveway way too fast, the trailer fishtailing behind us. There was another thud and a weird howling sound, and when I checked the mirror again, the creature was gone. Must have tumbled off when we hit a sharp turn. We didn't stop until we reached the Washington State Fairgrounds in town, about 15 miles away. They had livestock facilities there, and the night security guard, confused but helpful, let us park the trailer and keep the goats there after Jeremy made up some story about a barn fire. We spent the night in the truck, jumping at every sound. In the morning light, things seemed less terrifying, but we weren't taking any chances. We decided to leave the goats at the fairgrounds and commute to the farm daily to keep the milk business running. We only went during daylight hours, always together, and we never stayed past sunset. When Aunt Rose and Uncle Mark returned 2 weeks later, we told them everything. They were devastated about losing Coco and horrified to discover that something had completely uprooted many of their blackberry plants. Not just stripped the berries, but actually torn whole bushes out of the ground. Aunt Rose moved her remaining goats to a friend's farm in town and stayed in a travel trailer to watch over them. They put their farm up for sale a month later. Jeremy took a job managing an RV park in New Mexico. I moved to Salt Lake City to study filmmaking. I've spent hours researching what we saw that night. The locals call it Sasquatch or Bigfoot, but those names make it sound almost cartoonish. There was nothing funny about what we encountered. It was intelligent, powerful, and terrifying. I still have nightmares about those eyes reflecting in the flashlight beam. Sometimes I wake up thinking I hear that weird vocalization outside my apartment window, even though I'm hundreds of miles away now. The weirdest part. When we went back to the farm the next day, we found massive footprints near the barn, easily 18 inches long, but they disappeared at the forest edge like whatever made them just vanished into thin air. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. All I know is I'm never setting foot in those woods again, and I check the locks on my doors twice every night before I go to bed. Story 2. I've debated for years whether to share this. It happened in late August of 2003, and to this day I can't explain what I saw. I've been an avid outdoorsman my entire life, hunting, fishing, backpacking through some of the most remote wilderness areas in the country. But nothing prepared me for what happened that day at Mirror Lake. My brother Jeff and I had taken our 4 nephews, ages 9 to 13, on what was supposed to be a 3-day backpacking trip in Root National Forest in northern Colorado. We'd been planning it for months, the boys' first real wilderness experience. We'd hiked about 5 miles in from the trailhead that morning, well away from any roads or developed campgrounds. Mirror Lake isn't on many tourist maps, which is exactly why we chose it. The isolation was part of the experience we wanted the boys to have. We reached the lake around 2 in the afternoon. The boys were exhausted from the hike, city kids not used to carrying packs, so we let them rest by the shore while Jeff and I went to find a suitable tree to hang our food from. Bears aren't a huge problem in that area, but better safe than sorry when you've got 4 kids with you. The weather was perfect that day, warm but not hot, with that crystal clear mountain air that makes everything look sharper somehow. The lake was still as glass, reflecting the surrounding pines and the sky above. It was so quiet you could hear pine needles dropping. We followed a faint trail that curved around the lake toward a stand of taller pines near a marshy area. As we walked, I heard voices carrying across the water, sounded like kids and a few adults. Jeff spotted them first, a Boy Scout troop or something similar camped on the opposite shore, maybe 800 or 900 feet away. Not exactly what we'd hoped for, but the lake was big enough that we'd still have our privacy. Jeff went ahead, scanning the trees for a branch strong enough to hold our food bags. I lagged behind a bit, glancing across the brushy area toward the scout camp. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just someone from the scout group standing at the edge of the trees, watching their camp. But something about the shape wasn't right. It was partially obscured behind some low pine branches, but I could clearly see its head and upper body. The head was covered in what looked like light-colored hair, white or pale blonde, that hung past its shoulders. Its head and shoulders were exceptionally broad, much broader than any normal person's. What really struck me were its arms. They hung lower than a person's should, with the hands extending almost to knee level. It was standing completely still, just watching the scout camp from about 50 yards away from them. I'd guess it was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. For several seconds I just stared, trying to process what I was seeing. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it someone wearing a ghillie suit, a hunter in some kind of weird camouflage? But deep down, I knew it wasn't human. Then it moved. God, the way it moved. It suddenly turned and ran with this fluid, powerful motion through thick, marshy vegetation that would have bogged down any person. It took these enormous strides, covering ground with a speed that nothing human could match in that terrain. The long hair on its back and arms bounced as it moved. Within seconds, it had vanished into the marshy area between the lake and the denser forest beyond. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Without thinking, I unbuckled the snap on my sidearm holster. I've carried a .45 on backcountry trips for 20 years, never once felt the need to draw it until that moment. "Jeff!" I called out, my voice sounding strange even to myself. He came back down the trail, a questioning look on his face. "Found a good spot," he said, then noticed my expression. "What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost." I told him what I'd seen, pointing to where the creature had been standing. Jeff squinted in that direction, then looked back at me skeptically. "Seriously? Like a Bigfoot or something?" He wasn't mocking me exactly, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. "I don't know what it was," I said, "but it wasn't a person. I'm sure of that." Jeff suggested we walk over to where I'd seen it. I agreed, though part of me didn't want to go anywhere near that spot. We trudged through the marshy area, me scanning the tree line constantly. When we reached the place where I'd seen it standing, there was nothing. No tracks I could make out in the mix of pine needles and spongy ground. No broken branches, nothing. "Let's go talk to those scouts," Jeff said. "Maybe one of them has white or blonde hair and was just walking around." It seemed reasonable enough, so we hiked around the lake to their campsite. There were 2 adult leaders and 7 boys, all with dark or brown hair. When we casually asked if anyone from their group had been exploring the woods on our side of the lake, they said no. Everyone had been together setting up camp. On our walk back to our nephews, Jeff was quiet for a while. "You really saw something, didn't you?" he finally asked. "Yeah, I did." My hands were still shaking slightly. "I believe you saw something," he said carefully. "I've never seen you react like this to anything." When we got back to our campsite, the boys were full of energy again, skipping rocks on the lake. We decided to tell them and set up camp, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every sound from the forest made me tense up. I kept scanning the tree line, expecting to see that pale figure standing there. We cooked dinner over our little camp stove as the sun started to sink behind the mountains. I told the boys about what I'd seen, trying to make it sound more like an interesting curiosity than something terrifying. They reacted exactly as you'd expect, a mix of excitement and nervous jokes about Bigfoot coming to get them in their sleep. "Uncle Mike's trying to scare us," my oldest nephew said, but I could tell from his eyes that he wasn't entirely sure. As darkness fell, we hung our food bags in the tree Jeff had found earlier. I insisted we go together, no one alone, and gathered around our small campfire. The scout troop across the lake had a bigger fire going, their voices occasionally carrying across the water. I found their presence comforting now. Around 9, we sent the boys to their tents. Jeff and I stayed by the fire a while longer. The night was clear, stars impossibly bright above the dark outline of the trees. "You know," Jeff said quietly, "I didn't want to say anything in front of the boys, but I believe you. The way you reacted, that wasn't normal for you. You've been in these woods your whole life." I appreciated him saying that. Jeff knew me better than anyone, and he could tell this wasn't me making up stories or misidentifying something ordinary. We turned in around 10, sharing a 2-person tent a few feet from the boys' larger tent. I kept my pistol next to my sleeping bag, something I'd never done before on any camping trip. None of us slept well that night. Every snapping twig or rustling branch jerked me awake. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something moving around our campsite, heavy footsteps circling slowly. I lay frozen, listening intently, my hand on my gun. After what seemed like an eternity, the sounds moved away. I wanted to look outside, but some primal instinct kept me still and silent in my tent. In the morning, I checked around our campsite for tracks, but found nothing conclusive. Just some broken branches and disturbed undergrowth that could have been anything. The boys complained they'd heard weird noises all night. They wanted to go home, no longer excited about 2 more days in the wilderness. Honestly, I was relieved. We packed up quickly, barely stopping for a cold breakfast, and hit the trail by 8. As we hiked out, I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the forest around us. The 5-mile hike back to the trailhead felt like 20. I only started to relax when we reached the parking lot and loaded our gear into the truck. On the drive home, Jeff and I discussed what to tell the boys' parents. We decided to say one of the nephews wasn't feeling well. No need to worry everyone with tales of mysterious creatures in the woods. But when Jeff and I were alone later, he admitted something. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard something too. Heavy breathing outside the tent. Not an animal, at least not one I could identify. I've spent countless hours researching since then, looking into reports of similar sightings in Colorado. There are more than you might think. I've talked to a few people who've had experiences they can't explain. Hunters, rangers, hikers. Most won't discuss it publicly for fear of ridicule. I still go hiking and camping, but never in that area again, and never without my sidearm. I don't know what I saw that day at Mirror Lake. I don't have a name for it, but I know it was real, and I know it was watching those scouts with an intelligence that still chills me when I think about it. That pale hair, those impossibly long arms, the way it moved through terrain that would challenge even the most experienced hiker. These details are burned into my memory. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear those heavy footsteps circling my house. Whatever it was, it doesn't belong in our understanding of the natural world, and I hope to God I never see it again. Story 3. I've never really told this story outside my immediate family because, well, people tend to look at you funny when you start talking about seeing something that doesn't exist. But it's been over 30 years now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that summer night in Colorado. It was mid-July, 1992. My brother Len and I had planned this quick fishing trip to San Isabel National Forest. Just a simple overnight thing. We'd been there dozens of times before. There's this pull-off spot along Cottonwood Creek in Custer County that we'd always loved. Good fishing, beautiful scenery, and usually teeming with wildlife. We called it our secret spot, though I'm sure plenty of locals knew about it too. We arrived around 7:30 in the evening. The sun was still up but starting to dip behind the mountains. The moment we turned off the main road and started heading down into the canyon, something felt wrong. I can't explain it any other way. The air felt heavy, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. There was this stillness that didn't belong. "Hey, notice anything weird?" I asked Len as we bumped down the dirt road in my old Ford pickup. "Like what?" he said, not really paying attention, already thinking about the beers cooling in our cooler. "Listen," I said, and that's when it hit him too. Silence. Complete silence. No birds calling, no insects buzzing, nothing, in a place that should have been alive with sound. We pulled up to our usual spot and got out. Normally we'd see chipmunks darting around, hear jays scolding us for invading their territory, but there was nothing, just dead silence and this feeling, this unmistakable feeling of being watched. "Probably just some hikers nearby," Len said, but I could tell he felt it too. We kept looking over our shoulders as we unloaded our gear. After setting up our small tent, we realized we'd forgotten to bring bait for fishing. Rookie mistake. So we grabbed our small folding shovel and headed toward the creek bank to dig for worms. The whole time, that feeling of being observed intensified. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up, and I noticed my hands were shaking as I turned over clumps of soil. "This is stupid," I remember muttering. "There's nothing out here." But I didn't believe that. Not really. We managed to find enough worms for the morning and headed back to the truck. We set up our lantern, built a small fire in the existing fire pit, and started cooking some hot dogs on sticks. Normal camping stuff, right? But nothing felt normal. I was trying to act casual, cracking open a beer and taking a long swig, when I noticed Len had gone completely still. His beer was in his hand, unopened, and he was staring across the creek with this expression I'd never seen on my brother's face before. It was beyond fear. It was like he was seeing something his brain couldn't process. I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. Across the creek, maybe 40 yards away, there was this being. I hesitate to call it an animal because it moved with such purpose, such intelligence. It was crouching behind a patch of willows, but it wasn't just standing there. It was actively watching us, moving between willow clumps, trying not to be seen. It used one massive hand, and I mean massive, to pull a willow branch aside, then leaned its head around to look at us. The size of this thing! God, it had to be over 7 feet tall, and that was while it was crouching. Its build was enormous, not fat but solid, powerful. Dark hair covered its entire body, but it wasn't like bear fur. It was more human-like in texture, if that makes any sense. Its arms hung unusually low, almost to its knees, and it kept moving its head from side to side, keeping us in view. I was so shocked that I lost my balance and fell backward off the log I was sitting on. When I scrambled back up, the creature had moved. It was heading westward, still using the willows for cover, moving with this bizarre combination of stealth and urgency. Then it just disappeared. Len and I looked at each other, neither of us saying a word. What was there to say? We both knew what we'd seen wasn't possible, yet we'd both seen it. The silence was shattered by violent splashing, the sound of something large crashing through the creek. Then came this noise I'll never forget. The sound of something forcing its way through thick brush up the canyon wall. But here's the thing that still haunts me. It didn't slow down. Whatever this was, it went up that steep hillside like it was nothing, breaking through brush and moving at a speed that nothing that size should be capable of. We sat there frozen, listening as the sounds moved deeper into the forest. I kept expecting to smell something. All those Bigfoot stories talk about a terrible smell. But I didn't detect anything unusual. Maybe the campfire smoke masked it, or maybe that's just a myth. But what I saw was real. The visual encounter probably lasted only about 2 minutes, but it's burned into my memory forever. "We should sleep in the truck tonight," Len finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Screw that," I replied. "We're leaving. Now." We packed up in complete silence, working with an efficiency born of pure fear. Within 10 minutes, we had everything thrown haphazardly into the truck bed. I didn't even bother properly extinguishing the fire, just kicked dirt over it and hoped for the best. In retrospect, that was incredibly irresponsible, but rational thought wasn't exactly my priority at that moment. The drive out was tense. Every shadow looked like it might be that thing, watching us, waiting. Len kept checking the side mirrors. I kept my foot heavy on the gas, bottoming out the truck's suspension more than once on that rough road. We didn't talk about it that night. We drove all the way back to Colorado Springs in silence, both processing what we'd seen. The next morning, over coffee, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, Len suggested, but his heart wasn't in it. "Bears don't move like that," I said. "They don't hide and peek and observe like that thing was doing." "Could have been a guy in a suit," he offered weakly. "In 1992, in the middle of nowhere. For what purpose?" We went around like this for a while, but we both knew what we'd seen. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, it was something else entirely. For years, I avoided that spot, wouldn't go near it. But about 25 years later, around 2017, I took some friends there. I wanted to show them exactly where it happened, maybe to convince myself it was all just a misunderstanding, a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. The landscape had changed surprisingly little. The willows were taller, the fire pit was gone, but it was unmistakably the same place. Standing there, with the creek babbling exactly as it had that night, I felt none of the oppressive dread from before. Birds sang, insects buzzed, and chipmunks darted through the underbrush. It was just a beautiful spot in the Colorado wilderness. But I still wouldn't camp there. Not for all the money in the world. I've been an outdoorsman my entire life. I know what bears look like, what moose look like, what elk look like. I'm familiar with all the wildlife that's supposed to be in those mountains. What Len and I saw that night in Timber Canyon doesn't fit any of those categories. It moved with intelligence and purpose. It was watching us, studying us, and when it realized we'd spotted it, it left with a speed and power that still defies explanation. I don't know what to call it. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that something was out there that night, something that shouldn't exist according to science and common sense, but does. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through those remote canyons, watching other campers who have no idea they're being observed. I wonder if anyone else has seen it and, like me, chosen to stay quiet rather than face ridicule. All I know for certain is that the world is stranger than we're willing to admit. There are things out there we don't understand and probably never will. That night taught me to question what I thought I knew about the natural world. And it's why, to this day, whenever I go camping, I always sleep with one eye open. Story 4. I still feel uneasy writing this down, even after all these years. I've only told a few close friends and family about what happened that morning, but I need to get this off my chest finally. Maybe someone out there has seen the same thing. It was September 29th, 2007. The date is burned into my memory. I was driving my old Ford F-150 down one of the back routes near Sabine National Forest. I've lived in East Texas my whole life, grew up hunting these woods with my dad and grandpa, so I know every trail and dirt road like the back of my hand. That morning I was heading toward Highway 103, taking the scenic route like I often did. It was around 6:30 in the morning, just as the sun was starting to filter through the pine trees. The road had a lot of curves, and I was coming around one particular bend that locals call Buckhorn Hill. It's nothing special, really, just a slight incline with dense forest on both sides, but everyone around here knows it by that name. I wasn't driving fast, maybe 30 miles per hour, just enjoying the quiet morning, sipping my coffee and thinking about the day ahead. That's when I saw it. Just about 20 feet ahead of me, on the right side of the road, something was crossing over a 3-strand barbed wire fence that separated the road from a small clearing. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I hit the brakes instinctively, my truck sliding slightly on the gravel before coming to a stop right in the middle of the road. The thing, I don't know what else to call it, was stepping over that fence like it was nothing, just one smooth stride. The fence had to be at least 4 feet high, and this thing just stepped over it without breaking its stride. That's when I realized how tall it was. Had to be close to 8 feet. No exaggeration. I sat there, knuckles white on the steering wheel, as this creature moved with heavy, deliberate steps. What struck me most was that it never once looked my way, never acknowledged my truck idling there, my headlights still on in the early morning light. It just kept walking, purposeful, like it had somewhere important to be. The sun was hitting it from behind, so I could see it clearly. It had this reddish-brown hair, maybe 4 inches long, hanging from its arms and shoulders. Not fur exactly, more like hair, and its build was wrong. Not like a bear, not like any animal I've ever hunted or seen. Its shoulders were incredibly wide and thick, no visible neck to speak of, just this massive upper body. But what really got me were the arms. They hung down past its knees, way too long for any human proportions. As it moved away from the fence and into the clearing, I could smell something coming through my partially open window, a strong, damp odor, like a wet dog that's been rolling in something funky, but worse, much worse. I could even hear the sound of grass moving as it stepped through the tall weeds in the clearing. I've spent most of my life in these woods. I've tracked deer, hunted wild boar, encountered bobcats and coyotes. I know every animal that's supposed to be in this forest. This wasn't one of them. I sat there paralyzed for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. The creature never sped up, never ran, just kept that same heavy pace as it crossed the clearing and disappeared into the tree line on the other side. I remained sitting there in my truck for several more minutes, heart pounding in my chest, before I finally found the courage to put the truck back in drive and continue on my way. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing emerge from the woods again, maybe following my truck this time. But there was nothing. I almost called in sick to work that day. I couldn't focus on anything. All I could see was that creature stepping over the fence, those impossibly long arms, the way it moved with such confidence through terrain that would give most humans trouble. But I went in anyway, needing the distraction, needing to be around normal, everyday things. It wasn't until a few days later that I worked up the courage to mention it to a co-worker, Rick, who'd been working in the area even longer than me. I was careful how I phrased it, not wanting to sound crazy. "Ever seen anything strange out near Buckhorn Hill?" I asked during lunch break. The way his fork paused halfway to his mouth told me everything I needed to know. He set it down slowly and looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Part fear, part relief. "You saw it too," he said. It wasn't a question. Rick told me he'd seen something similar on that exact same stretch of road back in the early 90s. He'd been driving home late one night when his headlights caught something crossing the road. He described the same tall figure, the same reddish-brown hair, the same unsettling proportions. He'd never told anyone at work about it, afraid people would think he was drinking on the job or just plain crazy. That conversation led me to ask my grandfather about it the next time I visited him. Grandpa had spent his entire life in these woods, and if anyone would know something, it would be him. I didn't even have to finish my description before he was nodding his head. "Late 80s, he said, his eyes distant with the memory. "I was checking my fence line at dusk when I saw not one, but two of them walking across my back field. Thought they were people at first, maybe trespassers, yelled out to them, but when they turned..." He shook his head. "No man is built like that. No man moves like that." According to Grandpa, there have been stories about these creatures in the Sabine forest for generations. The old-timers called them different names, but they all described the same thing: tall, powerful beings that avoided human contact but were occasionally spotted crossing roads or fields, usually at dawn or dusk. I've tried researching it since then. I've read books about Bigfoot and Sasquatch sightings, joined online forums where people share similar experiences. Some accounts match mine almost exactly. The height, the long arms, the reddish hair, the way it moved. It helps knowing I'm not alone in what I saw, but it doesn't make it any easier to understand. I've gone back to Buckhorn Hill many times since then, always hoping to catch another glimpse, always dreading the possibility at the same time. I've parked my truck at that same spot, hiked into the woods where it disappeared, looking for tracks or hair or any evidence. I've never found anything conclusive, just occasional broken branches too high up for a human to reach. Unusual depressions in the soft ground that could be footprints, but could also be nothing. One thing that's always bothered me is how calmly it crossed that barbed wire fence. One smooth step over, no hesitation, like it had done it 100 times before, like that was its regular crossing point. I wonder how many times it had walked that path while I drove by, oblivious. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, the image of that creature vivid in my mind, the way the morning light filtered through its hair, the steady purpose in its stride, the complete lack of concern for my presence. It wasn't afraid of me, it wasn't curious about me, it simply acknowledged I wasn't a threat and continued on its way. That's what unsettles me the most, I think. Not that there might be unknown creatures living in our forests. The world is vast, and we discover new species all the time. What unsettles me is the intelligence I sensed in that brief encounter, the deliberate nature of its movements, the way it navigated human boundaries. That fence, with such familiarity, it knew what it was doing, it knew where it was going, and it's still out there. I've never again seen it directly, but there have been moments. Hiking alone, I've felt watched. I've heard branches breaking in patterns that don't match known wildlife. I've caught whiffs of that same distinctive odor when there's no logical source nearby. I don't hike alone anymore. I still drive that road sometimes, always slowing down at Buckhorn Hill, always scanning the tree line, my window cracked open to catch any unusual scents. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, to confirm I wasn't imagining things. A bigger part hopes I never do. What was it doing there that morning? Where was it going? Are there more of them? These questions haunt me. I've become obsessed with maps of the area, tracking reports of unusual sightings, trying to piece together territories or migration patterns. There's no consistency I can find, just occasional reports scattered across the forest, spanning decades. I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this story before that September morning, I'd have nodded politely while thinking they were exaggerating or confused or just plain lying. I get it. But I know what I saw. I was clear-headed, it was daylight, and I was less than 20 feet away. This wasn't a glimpse of something moving in the trees or a shadow in the periphery of my headlights. This was a solid, physical being that I observed for nearly a full minute. For those who've never had an experience like this, it's impossible to understand how it changes you, how it reshapes your understanding of the world. There are things in these woods that don't fit into the neat categories we've created. Things that have managed to stay hidden despite all our technology, all our development, all our intrusion into wild spaces. Sometimes I wonder if it saw me that day and simply didn't care, or if I was so insignificant to it that I didn't register as worth acknowledging. Either possibility is humbling. I still haven't told many people about this. My wife knows. A few close friends. Most would just think I'm crazy or looking for attention. But I know what I saw crossing that fence on Buckhorn Hill. And sometimes, when I'm driving those back roads at dawn, I catch myself slowing down at every barbed wire fence, every clearing, every patch of woods, half hoping, half dreading that I'll look up and see those long arms, that massive frame, that purposeful stride once again. Story 5. I'll never forget that summer evening when I was 12. It's been over 20 years now, but the memory still gives me goosebumps. I've never told this story to anyone outside my family because I know how it sounds. But I swear on everything I care about, what happened that day in Concord was real. It was late July, one of those perfect New Hampshire evenings where the air starts cooling down, but it's still light enough to be outside. Me and a bunch of neighborhood kids were playing tag in the front yard of our duplex. Nothing special about that day. My mom was inside making dinner, and some of the other parents were hanging out on the front porch of the house next door, drinking beers and talking. My two younger brothers, Tommy, 8, and Jake, 6, had wandered off toward the side of the house where we had this little path that led to the backyard. We weren't supposed to go back there after dark, but it wasn't fully dark yet. Just that in-between time when the shadows start getting longer. I remember I was it and was chasing Becky Simmons across the lawn when I heard screaming. Not playing screaming, real, terrified screaming. Tommy and Jake came tearing around the corner of the house, running faster than I'd ever seen them move. Their faces were completely white. "Booger bear! Booger bear!" Jake was shrieking at the top of his lungs. Tommy was just making this weird whimpering sound, like he couldn't even form words. The other kids all stopped playing immediately. There was this moment where nobody moved, and then everybody scattered at once. Becky, Jason, the Williams kids, they all ran straight to where the adults were sitting, but I just stood there, frozen in place. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe because I was the oldest and felt like I needed to be brave, or maybe just shock. "What are you talking about?" I called after my brothers, but they were already hiding behind our neighbor, Mr. Peterson, clutching his legs and sobbing. The adults were all standing up now, looking concerned, but nobody was coming over to where I was. They probably thought it was just kids being kids. But I knew my brothers. Tommy didn't scare easily, and I'd never seen either of them look like that before. I glanced toward the side of the house where they had come from. The sun was setting behind the trees across the street, casting long shadows. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. There was something large pressed against the corner of our duplex. It was hugging the wall, as if trying to stay in the shadows, but it was too big to hide completely. The thing that hit me first was the color. It wasn't dark like a bear or a person. It was pale, really pale, like dirty white or light gray. The fur, Yes, fur, looked thick and matted, almost like it was clumped together in places. I remember thinking it looked filthy, like something that had been rolling in dirt. As my eyes adjusted and my brain started catching up, I realized how massive this thing was, even hunched over like it was. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. The shoulders were impossibly wide, wider than our refrigerator. Its back was broad and powerful looking. I could see muscles shifting under the fur as it moved slightly. This wasn't a dog. It wasn't a person in a costume. The proportions were all wrong. Too big, too wide, too inhuman. I started backing away, trying not to make any sudden movements. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mouth went completely dry. I wanted to yell for my mom, for anyone, but no sound would come out. That's when it shifted position slightly. I heard this low, huffing sound, not quite a growl, more like the noise a horse makes when it blows air through its nose, but deeper, much deeper. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was still pressed against the building, half hidden in shadow. But I had the distinct feeling it was watching me. I don't remember deciding to move. My body just took over. I started backing away, slowly at first, then faster, until I turned and walked as quickly as I could toward the adults without actually running. I was terrified that if I ran, it would chase me. That's what predators do, right? They chase running prey. When I reached the porch where everyone was gathered, my mom grabbed me by the shoulders. "Michael, what on earth is going on? What happened to your brothers?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I just kept glancing back at the side of the house. The thing was gone, or at least I couldn't see it anymore from this angle. "There's something there," I finally managed to say, my voice coming out as a whisper. "By the side of the house. It's big." Mr. Peterson and my mom's boyfriend, Dave, immediately went into protective mode. Dave went inside and came back with a baseball bat, and they both walked across the yard toward where I had been standing. "Stay here," my mum told me, but of course I followed at a distance. I was scared out of my mind, but I had to know if they saw it too. They checked around the side of the house, the backyard, even went a little ways into the woods behind our property. They were gone maybe 5 minutes before coming back. "Nothing there," Dave said, shrugging. "Probably just a deer or something that spooked the boys." "That wasn't a deer," I insisted, my voice cracking. "It was huge. It had white fur." My mom put her arm around me. "Honey, it's getting dark. Your eyes can play tricks on you." "But Tommy and Jake saw it too," I protested. When we asked them, though, Tommy just looked at the ground and mumbled that he didn't remember what he saw. Jake was still crying and clinging to my mom, but when she asked him what a booger bear was, he just shook his head and wouldn't answer. That night I couldn't sleep. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and the window faced the side of the house where I'd seen the creature. That window had been nailed shut years ago because the frame was warped and it wouldn't close properly. I'd never minded before, but that night I kept staring at it, imagining those nails slowly working their way out. Every creak, every rustle of leaves outside made me jump. I kept thinking I heard that huffing sound again. At one point, I swear I heard heavy footsteps circling the house, but when I pressed my ear to the floor, the sound stopped. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up to bright sunlight streaming through my window. The fear from the night before seemed distant in the morning light, but not gone. As soon as my mom left for work, I went outside to check the side of the house. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints maybe, tufts of white fur caught on the siding. There was nothing like that. The only thing I noticed was that the grass along the side of the house was flattened in a wide path, like something heavy had pressed it down. But it was summer. It could have been anything. Maybe Dave had walked through there when he was checking around the house. Over breakfast, I tried to talk to my brothers about what we'd seen, but they both clammed up. Tommy got angry and told me to shut up about it. Jake just looked scared and said he didn't want to talk about the bear. My mum told me to drop it. She said I was scaring Jake all over again. In the days that followed, I became obsessed with figuring out what we had seen. I went to the library and looked up animals native to New Hampshire. Nothing matched what I'd seen. Bears in our area are black, not white. The size ruled out any normal wildlife. I even looked up polar bears, wondering if one had somehow escaped from a zoo, but the shape was all wrong. Then I found a book about cryptids and unexplained phenomena. There was a chapter on Bigfoot sightings. Most described a dark, hair-covered creature. But there were a few accounts of white Bigfoot sightings, mostly from the Pacific Northwest. The descriptions matched what I'd seen: the height, the broad shoulders, the matted fur. When I tried to tell my mum about this, she got upset. She said I was letting my imagination run wild and needed to stop scaring my brothers. The neighborhood kids had already started teasing Tommy about the booger bear, and he was coming home from summer activities upset almost every day. So I stopped talking about it, but I didn't stop thinking about it. As the summer went on, strange things kept happening around our house. The garbage cans would be knocked over in the night, but not torn into like raccoons would do. We'd find weird scratches high up on the trees at the edge of our yard. Once, all the birds in the area went completely silent in the middle of the day for about 10 minutes. No one else seemed to notice these things, or if they did, they didn't connect them to what had happened that evening. By the time school started in September, my brothers seemed to have forgotten the whole incident, or at least they pretended to have forgotten. But sometimes I'd catch Tommy staring out the window at dusk with this tense look on his face, and Jake refused to play in the backyard alone anymore. We moved away from that duplex the following year. When my mom got a better job in Manchester, I was almost relieved to leave. Almost. I'm 34 now, with kids of my own. We live in Arizona, about as far from the forests of New Hampshire as you can get. I've never told my wife the full story, just that I had a scary experience as a kid that gave me a thing about windows at night. She thinks it's cute that I always double-check the locks before bed. Last year, I took my family to visit my mom back east. One night, after the kids were in bed, I asked Tommy if he remembered the booger bear incident. He got really quiet, then said, "Why would you bring that up?" He wouldn't say anything else about it. To this day, I don't know what we saw. Logic tells me it was probably just someone playing a prank, or some weird light effect, or my young mind exaggerating a normal animal sighting. But deep down, I know better. What I saw was real. It was massive, it was white, and it was watching us. Sometimes I still dream about it. In my dreams, I'm 12 again, standing alone in that yard as the sun sets. But in the dreams, I don't back away. Instead, I stand my ground as the white figure steps fully out of the shadows and I finally see its face. I always wake up before I can remember what it looked like. Maybe that's for the best. Story 6. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. Most people I've told think I'm either lying or that I was hallucinating from dehydration or something. I know what I saw, though. I've spent over a decade trying to make sense of it. This happened back in November 2009. I'd been out of the army for about 3 years by then, and a group of us had this annual deer hunting trip in the Ouachita Mountains in Montgomery County, Arkansas. There were 4 of us that year: me, my buddy Dave, who I served with, and 2 guys from Dave's work. We'd been planning this trip for months. This part of Arkansas is seriously remote. Like, not the kind of forests where you run into other hikers or hunters. We hiked about 7 miles from where we parked our trucks, deep into this rugged terrain that probably hadn't seen human footprints in months. This was our 3rd year hunting there, but we'd gone even deeper than usual because the deer had been scarce the year before. We set up our base camp on Thursday evening and planned to split up at dawn on Friday. Each of us had our GPS and walkie-talkies, though the reception was spotty at best. Dave and I had found these old wooden tree stands the previous year, probably built by hunters years ago. Mine was about half a mile east of our camp, on a ridge overlooking a small clearing. Perfect spot for deer to pass through. I woke up before sunrise on Friday, grabbed my rifle, some snacks, water, and headed to my stand. It was cold, probably in the low 30s, with this misty fog hanging between the trees. I climbed up to my stand around 5:30 in the morning, settled in, and waited for the sun to come up. Nothing happened for the first couple hours. I saw a few squirrels, some birds, but no deer. I ate an apple and an orange I'd brought along, tossing the core and peel on the ground about 20 feet from my tree. Around 9, I started feeling drowsy. The sun had warmed things up a bit, and I was bundled in my camo. I'm not proud of it, but I dozed off. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up suddenly to this smell, not like a dead animal or anything I could easily identify. It was musky, almost like wet dog, but much stronger, and with this weird sour undertone. My eyes snapped open, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Complete silence. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows that's not normal. My heart started racing immediately. Something was wrong. I sat perfectly still, not even moving my head, just shifting my eyes to scan the area. That's when I saw it. About 25 feet below my stand, there was this creature. I hesitate to call it a creature because that makes it sound like some fantasy monster, but I don't know what else to call it. It was examining the apple core and orange peel I'd tossed earlier. This thing was maybe 5 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair or fur, not patchy like a mangy bear, full coverage except for parts of its face and palms. It was crouched down, and I could see it had hands, not paws, actual hands with opposable thumbs, picking up my apple core. The fingers were longer than human fingers, with rounded, thick nails. Its feet were similar, more like elongated human feet than animal paws. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I was trying to process what I was seeing. My mind was racing through possibilities. Bear cub? No. Escaped monkey in Arkansas? No way. The thing was carefully examining my trash, turning the apple core over in its hands, sniffing it. Its movements were deliberate, almost human-like. That's when I first thought Bigfoot. But this wasn't the giant monster from the Patterson film. This looked like a young one, maybe a juvenile. While I was frozen in my stand, trying not to make a sound, there was a loud crashing noise from up the hill, like something big was moving through the underbrush. The smaller creature's head snapped up instantly. Then I heard what I can only describe as vocalizations, deep, guttural sounds that shifted in pitch and tone. They weren't animal grunts or calls. They had structure, almost like speech, but definitely not human language. The smaller one jumped to its feet with shocking agility and ran about 30 feet before stopping. Then it made its own sounds back toward whatever was coming, higher pitched, faster patterns. I realized it was responding. They were communicating. That's when the bigger one emerged from the tree line, and I nearly fell out of my stand. This thing was massive, 8 feet tall at minimum, maybe 9. Its hair was darker, almost black, with some gray streaks around what I'd call its shoulders. Its body was built like a heavyweight bodybuilder, but with proportions all wrong. Incredibly broad shoulders, massive chest, but with long arms that hung down past its knees. The way it moved was both powerful and graceful, not lumbering like a bear, purposeful, deliberate steps. I could see muscles rippling under the hair as it approached the smaller one. They stood facing each other, making these vocalizations back and forth. The bigger one seemed agitated, making sharper, louder sounds while gesturing with its arms. I swear it looked like a parent scolding a child. During this conversation, the smaller one suddenly turned and looked directly at my tree stand. I don't know if it smelled me or just happened to look up, but our eyes met. Its face, God, its face. It was flat, not protruding like an ape's. The eyes were wide set, dark brown or black, with a broad nose and a mouth that was more human than anything else. The second it spotted me, both creatures dropped into a crouch and let out these howls that echo in my nightmares to this day. They started low and rose in pitch, carrying across the ridge. They were loud enough that I felt the vibration in my chest. This wasn't a warning call to me, it was alarm calls to each other, or maybe to others in the area. The larger one shoved the smaller one, actually pushed it with its hands, and the smaller one took off running. I've never seen anything move that fast through dense forest. It was gone in seconds, weaving between trees without breaking stride. Then the adult turned toward me. It raised one arm to block the sunlight from its eyes and just stared at me. I was looking at a face that was neither human nor ape, but somehow both. Its eyes held intelligence. I wasn't looking at an animal. I was looking at a being that was assessing me, thinking about me. I couldn't move. My rifle was right there across my lap, but I couldn't even think about raising it. I was completely frozen with a mix of fear and awe. This staring contest probably only lasted 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like hours. Then, without any warning signs, it just turned and walked away. Not running in fear like the smaller one, but walking deliberately, looking back twice at me. As it moved through the forest, it let out more of those deep howls and started making these knocking sounds, like it was taking a piece of wood and striking it against another tree. Knock, 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 rhythmic, purposeful. I sat in that tree stand for another hour, unable to move. My legs were literally shaking too hard to climb down safely. I finally got on my walkie-talkie and called Dave, trying to keep my voice calm, asking where he was. He was about half a mile west of me. I told him I was heading back to camp and needed him to meet me there. I didn't say why over the radio. When I finally got back to camp, Dave was already there. Before I could say anything, he looked at me and said, "You saw something, didn't you?" The look on his face told me everything. He'd seen something too. Dave had spotted the larger one crossing a ridge about 300 yards from his position. He only saw it for maybe 10 seconds, but he described the same creature, massive, bipedal, covered in dark hair, moving with purpose through the forest. We packed up camp immediately. The other 2 guys thought we were crazy, but they helped us break down the site when they saw how serious we were. We hiked out that same day, not saying much about what we'd seen until we were back in civilization. I've spent years researching since then. I've read every book on Bigfoot sightings, joined online forums, even gone to a couple of conferences. Some accounts match what I saw perfectly. Others seem like complete fiction. I don't know what to believe anymore. What I do know is what I saw that day changed me. Those weren't bears. They weren't people in suits. They were something else. Something that communicated, that had social structures, that reacted with intelligence to finding a human in their territory. The thing that sticks with me most isn't the physical appearance or even the fear I felt. It's the clear intelligence I saw in those eyes and the complex communication I witnessed between them. They weren't just animals. They belonged in those woods in a way I never will. They knew the forest in ways I never could. I haven't been hunting since. Not because I'm afraid, though I'd be lying if I said those howls don't still wake me up sometimes. I haven't gone back because it feels like trespassing now. Those mountains belong to something else. Something that was there long before us and will probably be there long after we're gone. I still don't know what to call what I saw. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some undiscovered primate. All I know is they're out there, they're intelligent, and they're watching us just as carefully as we're looking for them. Story 7. I don't know if I'm crazy or what, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm still trying to make sense of what's been happening on my hunting property in Jackson Parish over the last few years. I've been hunting those woods since I was a teenager, and nothing ever felt off until about 3 years ago. Now I can't even bring myself to hunt the west side after September. For those who don't know the area, Jackson Parish is in north-central Louisiana. My property has about 80 acres of mixed terrain, open fields on the east side that transition into thick timber, low gullies, and overgrown hardwood bottoms on the west. It's prime deer territory, especially along those western edges where they bed down during the day. The first weird thing happened in early October, 3 years back. I was walking to my spot before sunrise, maybe around 5:30 in the morning. The air had that perfect fall crispness to it, and I was taking my time, trying to be quiet. I know those woods like the back of my hand, so even in the dark, I wasn't worried about getting lost. I was about halfway to my usual stand when I heard this sharp crack that damn near made me jump out of my skin. It wasn't a gunshot, more like a tree branch breaking, but way louder than anything a deer would make. Maybe 30 yards up the ridge, a whole tree started violently shaking. The movement was so aggressive that I could see it even in the pre-dawn light. Whatever caused it took off running, and I mean running. The footfalls were heavy and fast, crashing through the underbrush. The thing that got me was the cadence. It wasn't moving on 4 legs. This was bipedal, 2 feet, but way too heavy to be a person. No hunter makes that much noise, and it was covering ground faster than any human could through that thick stuff. I stood frozen for a good 5 minutes, just listening as the sounds faded into the distance. Finally convinced myself it was probably a bear, though I'd never seen one on my property before, and they're pretty uncommon in this specific area. I finished my hunt that day but didn't see a single deer. I tried to forget about it, but the next year it happened again. Different encounter, same feeling of wrongness. I was in a makeshift blind I'd set up near one of the deeper gullies. It was getting on towards sunset, and I was about to pack it in when I heard something. To this day, I can't properly describe that sound. It wasn't a scream, wasn't exactly a howl. It was somewhere in between, but with this depth and resonance that I felt in my chest cavity. My whole body tensed up like I'd been electrocuted. The sound lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it seemed to echo forever. I've heard coyotes, bobcats, even a mountain lion once down in Texas. This wasn't anything like those. It had an almost human quality to it, but distorted and amplified beyond what any person could produce. I packed up immediately and practically jogged back to my truck, looking over my shoulder the whole way. I told my hunting buddy Mike about it, and he suggested maybe it was just a weird coyote or an owl. But I know what I heard, and I know how it made me feel, like prey. This past September, I was out scouting the property, checking trail cameras and looking for sign. I like to get a feel for deer movement patterns before the season starts. It was mid-afternoon, hot as hell even for Louisiana in September. I was sweating through my shirt, swatting mosquitoes, when I heard 3 distinct whoops coming from the woods to the north. Whoop, 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 perfectly spaced, about 3 seconds apart. They weren't bird calls or any animal I recognized, and they were loud, carrying over a good distance. I stood stock still, waiting to see if there would be more, but everything went silent after that. The woods got that unnatural quiet that happens when something big is moving through. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. The hair on my arms was standing straight up despite the heat. I finished checking my last camera as quickly as I could and got the hell out of there. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a logical explanation, but deep down, I was starting to think something was in those woods that shouldn't be there. Then came October 9th of this year. I'll never forget that date because it's when I finally admitted to myself that I wasn't imagining things. I'd decided to hunt the eastern edge of the western section, staying close enough to the open areas that I had an escape route, but still in decent deer territory. I'd set up before dawn and spent a quiet morning seeing nothing but squirrels. Around 11, I decided to move positions, thinking I might have better luck closer to a water source where I'd seen good sign. I was picking my way carefully through some briar thickets when I felt it. 3 distinct thuds that actually vibrated the ground under my boots. Thud, 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 like something massive was stomping with its full weight, deliberately making its presence known. The sounds came from behind a wall of vegetation maybe 40 yards away. But that's what was strangest. Nothing moved, no thrashing in the underbrush, no visual indication of anything there. Just those 3 powerful impacts, and then nothing. My mouth went completely dry. I stood frozen, rifle half raised, every sense straining. The woods had gone silent again, that same unnatural quiet I'd experienced before. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, feel sweat trickling down my back that had nothing to do with the temperature. I don't know how long I stood there, probably only a minute or two, but it felt like hours. Then a single crow called from somewhere overhead, and it broke the spell. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on that spot, until I hit the tree line, where it opened into the field. Then I turned and walked as fast as I could without running back to my truck. When I got home, I started researching. I'd heard stories about Bigfoot or Sasquatch before, obviously, but had always written them off as myths or misidentifications. But the more I read about other people's experiences, the more familiar they sounded. The tree knocks, the whoops, the feeling of being watched, the way wildlife goes silent, the bipedal movement. I know how this sounds. I'm a rational person. I work as an electrical engineer, for God's sake. I don't believe in ghosts or aliens or any of that nonsense, but I also trust my senses, and something is in those woods that I can't explain. The stomping felt like a warning, like it was telling me I was getting too close to its territory. That realization hit me hard the next day. This thing, whatever it is, has probably been there for years. It's only in the last 3 that I've encountered it, which makes me think I've been unknowingly encroaching on its space. I've been trying to establish a pattern. All the encounters have been on the western side of my property, in the thickest parts of the woods. All have happened in early fall, from mid-September to mid-October. I wonder if it's migratory, following food sources or weather patterns, or maybe it's territorial and becomes more aggressive during certain seasons. Since that day, I've stuck to the open eastern side of my property. Part of me wants to set up cameras specifically to try and catch whatever this is, but another part of me is afraid of what might happen if it realizes I'm trying to document it. If this is what I think it is, some kind of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, then based on other accounts I've read, they don't take kindly to being observed or recorded. I've told a couple close friends, and they think I'm either exaggerating or misinterpreting normal forest sounds. My wife believes me, though. She's seen how these experiences have affected me, how I come back from the property tense and quiet. She's the one who suggested I avoid that area entirely after mid-September. Last weekend, I was checking a trail camera on the eastern edge, still well away from where I'd had my encounters. As I was walking back to my truck in the late afternoon, I got that feeling again, the intense sensation of being watched. I scanned the tree line where the open field meets the western woods, and for just a second I thought I saw something, a dark shape, taller than a man, partially obscured by a tree. By the time my brain registered what I was seeing, it was gone. I haven't been back since. I'm not sure when I'll go again. Maybe after November, when deer season is in full swing and there are more hunters around. Safety in numbers, I guess. I keep replaying these encounters in my head, wondering if there's something I missed, some ordinary explanation I'm overlooking. But those thuds I felt through my boots weren't made by any known animal in these woods. That sound I heard wasn't from any creature I recognize, and whatever ran through the underbrush that first morning was moving on 2 legs, not 4. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm just putting this out there because I need to tell someone who might understand, who might have experienced something similar. I've hunted these woods for over 20 years, and I know the difference between normal forest sounds and what I've been experiencing. Whatever is out there, it comes back year after year. It knows the land as well as I do, maybe better, and for whatever reason, it's letting me know that part of my property isn't mine at all, at least not during the early fall. I'll update if anything else happens, but honestly, I'm hoping I don't have a reason to. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, especially when they stand over 7 feet tall and can shake the ground with a single stomp. Story 8. I've been lurking on this forum for months, reading everyone's experiences, and finally decided to share mine. I've kept this mostly to myself for years because people usually just roll their eyes or laugh it off. But I know what I saw that night in Carbondale, and I've never been able to forget it. This happened when I was 13, back in late February. One of those nasty, cold Illinois evenings where the weather can't decide if it wants to rain or snow, so it does both. My best friend Christy and I were at her house, and despite the sleet and wind, we were outside playing. That's what kids did before smartphones, I guess. Her mom had told us to come in soon because the weather was getting worse, but we were ignoring her, trying to squeeze in a few more minutes of freedom. We were standing at the end of Christy's long gravel driveway, our hands stuffed in our coat pockets, planning what we'd do the next day at school, when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It was just movement, a massive shadow moving across the road maybe 50 yards away. At first I thought it was a car coming, but there were no headlights. Do you see that? I remember asking Christy, my voice sounding weird even to me. We both turned to look, and that's when we saw it. This thing was running along the edge of the road before it crossed right under the streetlight by the Johnson's mailbox. And in that moment, when it was illuminated, I knew it wasn't human. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. This creature was massive, taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller, and it was covered head to toe in this long, rough-looking hair that looked dark and wet under the streetlight. The hair on its body wasn't uniform. It was longer in some places, especially around the shoulders and back. But what really struck me was how it moved. It ran upright on 2 legs, but everything about its proportions was wrong. It had these enormous broad shoulders that seemed to hunch forward, and its head didn't sit on top of its body like a person's. It was kind of low and broad, almost like it didn't have much of a neck. Its arms were the worst part. They swung so widely with each stride, like they were too long for its body, and they didn't swing like a person's arms. There was something off about the joint movement, like its elbows bent slightly differently than ours. My brain kept trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My first thought was that it had to be someone in a costume, maybe some high school kids playing a prank. But it was moving so fast, impossibly fast. No person could run like that, especially not in some bulky costume. And the way the hair on its chest moved as it ran, it wasn't like fabric. It moved like actual hair, swaying and sticking to its body from the rain. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stood there, my feet frozen to the gravel, watching as this thing passed the last streetlight and then disappeared into the tree line along the creek that ran behind the street. The whole sighting probably lasted maybe 15 seconds, but it felt like time had stopped. After it vanished into the trees, there was this moment of complete silence. I couldn't even hear the sleet anymore. Then Christy grabbed my arm so hard it left marks, and we both just stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. "Did you?" she started, but couldn't finish. "Yeah," I whispered. "I saw it." After what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute, Christy pulled me toward her house. We didn't run at first. It was like we were afraid running would attract its attention back to us. But then we heard something crack in the woods, and we bolted. We burst through her front door, probably looking like we'd seen a ghost. Christy's mum was in the kitchen making hot chocolate, and she turned around, surprised to see us so frightened. "What's wrong with you two?" she asked, looking concerned. We tried to explain what we'd seen, talking over each other, our words coming out jumbled and frantic. I remember saying something about a huge, hairy man thing, and Christy kept saying it wasn't human. It wasn't human. Her mom's face changed from concern to mild annoyance. She thought we were making it up, trying to avoid bedtime or just getting carried away because of the storm. She kept saying things like, "Girls, that's enough, and you've been watching too many scary movies." That night, sleeping over at Christy's house, we barely slept. We kept the blinds closed tight and jumped at every sound of the wind hitting the windows. We whispered about what we'd seen, comparing details. "Did you see its hands?" Christy asked me at one point. I hadn't. I'd been too focused on its face, or where its face should have been. I never got a clear look at its features, just the outline of that broad, low head against the streetlight. They were huge, she said, like bigger than my dad's hands, and dark. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the darkness and the storm. Maybe it was just a really tall person wearing a coat with the hood up. Maybe the sleet was distorting our vision. But whenever Christy and I talked about it, our descriptions matched perfectly. We'd both seen the same thing, down to the way its arms swung and how its chest heaved as it ran. I became pretty selective about who I told. My parents listened patiently, but exchanged those looks parents give each other when their kid is being dramatic. One of our teachers overheard us talking about it at lunch and suggested we'd seen a black bear, which was ridiculous because there aren't black bears in that part of Illinois. And even if there were, bears don't run on two legs like that. The worst was when I made the mistake of mentioning it to some other kids at school. The word Bigfoot came up, and suddenly everyone was laughing. I got teased for weeks. How's your hairy boyfriend, Amber? Did Bigfoot ask you to prom yet? I learned to keep my mouth shut. As the years passed, Christy and I talked about it less and less. Not because we stopped believing what we saw, but because we'd exhausted every possible explanation and gotten nowhere. By high school, it became this thing that had happened to us that nobody else would ever understand. But I never forgot. And as I got older and started spending more time outdoors, hiking and camping throughout Illinois, I started noticing things. Strange things that most people would probably ignore or rationalize away. Like the time I was camping near Garden of the Gods with my college boyfriend. We'd set up our tent and were sitting by the fire when I caught this strange, musky odor on the breeze. It wasn't like anything I'd smelled before. Not quite animal, not quite human, but definitely organic. Something primal in me recognized that smell, and the hairs on my arms stood up. My boyfriend couldn't smell it, or at least said he couldn't. Or the time I was hiking alone on a trail near Shawnee National Forest and kept hearing branches cracking behind me. Every time I'd stop and turn around, the sounds would stop too. But as soon as I started walking again, they'd resume, always keeping the same distance. I ended up practically running back to my car. Then there was the time I found those broken saplings way off the trail, snapped clean through more than 6 feet off the ground. No storm had come through recently. No logging was happening in the area. Just a line of young trees, broken at a height most humans couldn't reach without a tool. These incidents were subtle, easy to dismiss individually, but put together with what I saw that night in Carbondale, they form a pattern I can't ignore. It's been 20 years since that night, and I still think about it whenever there's a winter storm. I find myself checking that the doors are locked, the blinds are closed. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, certain I've heard something moving outside my window. I've read the scientific explanations, the skeptical arguments, the psychological theories about shared hallucinations, and the unreliability of eyewitness accounts. I understand why people don't believe. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it either. But I did see it. For 15 seconds on a sleety February night, I saw something that shouldn't exist, according to everything we're taught about the natural world. And once you've seen something like that, really seen it, not just glimpsed it or imagined it, you can't unsee it. It changes how you look at the woods, at the shadows, at the spaces between trees. I don't expect anyone reading this to believe me. That's not why I'm sharing this. I'm sharing it because keeping it inside for 20 years has been exhausting, because maybe, just maybe, someone else has seen what I saw. Someone else knows that feeling of having the entire foundation of your reality shifted in an instant. I never saw it again after that night. But sometimes, when I'm driving along a dark road and pass a wooded area, I slow down and look carefully at the tree line. Part of me is afraid I'll see that massive silhouette again. But another part of me, a part I don't like to acknowledge, kind of hopes I will, just so I can know, once and for all, that I'm not crazy. That what Christy and I saw that night was real. Because despite all the eye-rolling and dismissive comments I've received over the years, despite all the rational explanations I've tried to accept, I know what I saw. And on stormy nights when the wind howls against my windows, I find myself wondering if it's still out there, running through the rain, those two long arms swinging, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. And I wonder if it remembers the two young girls who stood frozen on a gravel driveway, watching it pass under the streetlight on a cold February night in Carbondale. Story 9. I still wake up sometimes thinking about what happened that day in April back in 2005. I've gone back and forth about sharing this for years, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. My dad, Eric, was the toughest guy I knew. Spent his whole life outdoors in Alaska. Knew every fishing spot within 50 miles of Palmer. That winter had been rough on him. Broke his hip slipping on ice in January. For a 72-year-old man, that's no small thing. The doctors weren't sure he'd walk right again, but by April, he was getting around with just a cane and absolutely determined to get back to fishing. "Lynn," he told me, "I'm taking your boat out tomorrow. Need to see the nick before I forget what it looks like." That was my dad, stubborn as hell. I'd tried arguing with him at first, but he got that look in his eyes. Anyone who's had a parent reach that age knows the look. The one that says they're still the parent, not the other way around. I remember feeling uneasy that morning. It was late April, still cold, but the ice had broken up on the river a few weeks earlier. Dad had bundled up in his old fishing gear, the same worn jacket and hat he'd had since I was a kid. I watched him load his tackle box and a thermos of coffee into my small aluminum fishing boat. His hands were shaking a bit, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, waving off my concerns. "Been fishing this river since before you were born." I should have insisted on going with him. That thought still haunts me. But I had work, and he was so happy to have his independence back after months of being housebound. When 6 o'clock came and went with no sign of him, I started to worry. By 7, I was calling my buddy Marcus to help me look for him. The sun was already setting as we loaded up my truck with flashlights and a first aid kit. I kept telling myself Dad had just lost track of time, or maybe the boat had engine trouble. But there was this feeling in my gut I couldn't shake. The Nick River isn't particularly wide, but it runs deep in places, and the current can be tricky, especially in spring when the snowmelt feeds into it. Dad's favorite spot was about 4 miles upstream, a quiet bend where the river widened a bit and the trout liked to gather. It was almost completely dark by the time Marcus and I reached the access point. We had to use our flashlights to follow the narrow path that ran alongside the river. The temperature had dropped and our breath clouded in front of us. The only sounds were our footsteps crunching on the gravel and the steady rush of the water. "He probably just lost track of time," Marcus kept saying, but I could hear the concern in his voice. We'd gone about 2 miles when I noticed something strange. The forest around the Nick is dense, spruce and birch mostly. But that night, it felt different, quieter. You know how the woods usually have this background noise? Birds, small animals rustling around. There was nothing, just the river and our breathing. Then we heard it. At first I thought it was branches knocking together in the wind, but there wasn't any wind. It was a clicking sound, almost like someone tapping stones together, coming from across the river. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. It had a rhythm to it, almost deliberate. "What the hell is that?" Marcus whispered, shining his flashlight toward the sound. That's when I saw them. Across the river, maybe 30 or 40 feet back from the opposite bank, 2 sets of eyes reflecting our light. Red eyes. Not the yellow-green reflection you get from deer or other animals. These were red like small embers, and they didn't blink. They were set apart, like they belonged to 2 separate things, and they were high up, maybe 7 or 8 feet off the ground. "Bears," Marcus suggested, but his voice cracked. We both knew bears don't have eyes that reflect red, and they don't stand that tall unless they're on their hind legs. The clicking sounds continued, seeming to come from the direction of those eyes. I called out for my dad, my voice echoing across the water. The eyes didn't move, just watched us, unblinking. We continued upriver, both of us constantly looking back at those eyes, following our progress from the other side. About half a mile further, we rounded a bend, and I spotted my boat. It was just sitting there in the water, maybe 10 feet from the shore, not moving despite the current, and beside it, floating in the water but not drifting away, was my dad. "Dad!" I screamed, already splashing into the freezing water. He was on his back, still wearing his life vest, one hand gripping the rope attached to the bow of the boat. His face was pale, his eyes closed. Marcus helped me pull him to shore. His skin was ice cold. I performed CPR while Marcus called for help on his cell phone, but I think I already knew. He was gone. The strangest part was how we found him. That section of the Nick has a strong current, especially in spring. The boat should have been swept downstream, my dad along with it. But somehow, both had remained in place, as if anchored. Yet there was no anchor dropped and the engine wasn't running. As we waited for help to arrive, I noticed the clicking sounds had stopped. I shined my light across the river again. The red eyes were still there, watching. I felt like they were watching over my dad specifically, not us. When the paramedics finally arrived, they confirmed what I already knew. The medical examiner later ruled it was a heart attack, said it was quick, that he probably didn't suffer. Small comfort. Here's where it gets even stranger. As we tried to bring the boat back to shore, it was like something was holding it back. Marcus and I both felt it, a resistance beneath the water. We were trying to paddle upstream with my dad's body in the boat, which would have been hard enough, but this felt different, like something was deliberately impeding our progress. It took both of us pulling with all our strength to get the boat moving. As we finally started making headway, I swear I heard the clicking sounds again, faster this time, almost agitated. And the eyes, they followed us all the way back until we reached the access point where our truck was parked. Only then did they finally disappear into the tree line. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. I didn't tell anyone about the eyes or the clicking sounds. What would I say? That something was watching over my dad when he died, that something kept his boat from drifting away so we could find him. It sounded crazy, even to me. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how he was still holding the rope when we found him, as if he'd been trying to keep the boat from floating away even as he was dying, about how the boat had stayed in place against the current, about those unblinking red eyes. A week after the funeral, I went back to that spot on the Nick. It was daytime, and I felt stupid and terrified at the same time. I stood on the bank where we'd found him and looked across to where I'd seen those eyes. In daylight, I could see it was farther away than I'd thought, at least 60 feet across the river and another 30 or 40 feet into the tree line. Whatever had those eyes must have been extremely large for me to see them so clearly from that distance. I didn't see anything unusual that day, but I left a small bundle of my dad's favorite fishing lures at the spot. It felt right somehow. Years have passed, and I've tried to make sense of what happened. My dad had been fishing that river for over 40 years. He knew every bend, every deep pool, every rock. The locals used to joke that he spent more time in the woods than in his house. I've started to wonder if maybe, whatever those things were, they recognized him. Maybe they'd been watching him all those years, and when his heart gave out, they stayed with him, kept him from drifting away until someone could find him. The most haunting part is this. I'm convinced they helped me find him to say goodbye. Because realistically, in the dark, we should never have found him so quickly along that stretch of river. It was like we were guided right to him. I've never gone fishing on the Nick again. Can't bring myself to. Marcus moved away a couple years later, and we lost touch. I don't know if he thinks about that night as much as I do. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I listen for that clicking sound. Part of me wants to hear it again, to know I didn't imagine it all. Part of me is terrified I will. I've researched strange encounters in Alaska for years now, trying to find something similar to what we experienced. The closest I've come are stories of the Kushtaka from Tlingit folklore, shape-shifting creatures said to inhabit the waterways of southeast Alaska, or maybe it was something else entirely. All I know is that something was with my father when he died. Something with red eyes that made clicking sounds, and somehow kept him from drifting away in that current. And sometimes, when I dream about that night, I don't feel afraid anymore. I feel grateful. Story 10. I've never really told this story to anyone outside my family. Everyone looks at you like you're crazy when you mention something like this. But I need to get this off my chest, and I figure if anyone would understand or believe me, it would be people here. This happened back in 2006, late summer. My family had just moved to this old farmhouse outside Dubois, Wyoming. We're originally from Arizona, but my dad got a job offer at a construction company up there, and we all relocated. I was 10 years old at the time. The farmhouse was pretty isolated, located on this dirt road about 15 minutes from the main highway. The property had this big weathered barn about 50 meters from the house, some grain silos further west, and a bunch of open land stretching out behind it. Coming from the city, it was a big adjustment for us kids. That morning started like any other. It was a Saturday, and I was sitting on the front porch with my younger brother Carlos, he was 4, and my baby sister Lucia, who was just a toddler. My mom was inside making breakfast, and my dad had already left for work. My other sister, Elena, who was 6, had wandered off toward the barn to look at some butterflies she'd spotted. We'd only been living there for about 3 weeks, and we were still exploring everything. Mom had told us not to go into the barn alone because it was old and might not be safe, but Elena was just hanging around outside it. I remember I was helping Carlos build something with his toy trucks when I heard Elena scream. Not like a playful scream, but the kind that makes your blood run cold. Then she started crying hysterically. I jumped up and looked toward the barn. That's when I saw it. Standing in the doorway of the barn was something massive. I remember thinking it couldn't be real at first. The barn door opening was maybe 7 feet tall, and this thing was standing there, hunched over slightly, and still its head was poking above the frame. It had to be 8 feet tall, maybe more. The thing that struck me immediately was how it filled the entire doorway. Its shoulders were so broad they nearly touched both sides of the frame, and it was covered in this thick, dark brown hair. Not like a bear's fur, but longer and shaggier. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but I could tell it was looking directly at Elena, who was frozen in place about 20 feet from the barn door. Everything happened so fast, but also in slow motion, if that makes any sense. The creature stepped forward, and that's when I noticed its arms. They hung down unnaturally low, almost to its knees. No human has arms like that. It moved with this weird grace that was terrifying, like it was powerful, but trying to be quiet. There was this wooden hog pen fence between the barn and where Eleanor was standing. It was maybe 3 feet high. This thing just stepped over it like it was nothing, didn't even break stride, just lifted one massive leg and stepped right over. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't call out to Elena, couldn't run to get my mom. Carlos started crying next to me, probably because I was squeezing his shoulder too hard without realizing it. When the creature reached the corner of the barn, it stopped. It turned its head slowly and looked southward, toward the mountains in the distance. Then it turned west and just walked away. Not running, not hurrying, just this purposeful stride heading toward the open land behind our property in the direction of the grain silos. The whole encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds. As soon as it started walking away, I finally found my voice and screamed for my mom. Elena was still standing there crying. My mom rushed outside and saw Elena in distress. She ran to her, scooped her up and hurried back to the house. "What happened? What's wrong?" she kept asking. Elena was too upset to speak coherently, just pointing at the barn and crying. "There was a monster, Mama," I said. "It came out of the barn and walked away." My mum's face changed then, not like she believed me, but like she was worried about what I was saying. She told us all to stay inside and away from the barn. It was probably just a bear or an elk, she said, trying to calm us down. Animals wander onto properties out here all the time, but I knew what I saw wasn't a bear or an elk. Bears don't stand upright like that for that long, and they don't have those proportions, and elk don't have arms. My dad came home for lunch that day, and my mum told him what happened. He seemed concerned but not alarmed. "I'll check the barn later," he promised, patting Elena's head. "Don't worry, Mija." But they were both busy that day, and the barn check kept getting delayed. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. After lunch, when everyone was occupied and Elena had calmed down enough to watch TV with the younger kids, I snuck out the back door. I had to see for myself. I approached the barn cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was still open, just like when the creature had emerged. I didn't go inside, I wasn't that brave, but I examined the ground around the entrance. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Massive footprints pressed into the dirt. They were nothing like human footprints, but they weren't bear tracks either. You could clearly see toe impressions, 5 of them, spread wide. The print itself had to be at least 16 inches long, maybe more. And the stride, the distance between prints, was huge. I couldn't stretch my legs far enough to match the distance between them. I followed the tracks to the fence, where they disappeared in the grass, but picked up again on the other side. They led exactly where I'd seen the creature go, toward the west side of the property. I ran back to the house, terrified, but also weirdly excited. I had proof, but when I tried to show my parents, my dad was on a phone call for work, and my mom was busy with the baby. "Not now, Miguel," she said, "and I told you to stay away from the barn." By the time my dad was free to check, it had started raining, one of those sudden summer storms that pop up in the mountains. The rain washed away most of the tracks. The few indentations that remained, my dad dismissed as probably an elk or moose. He checked the barn thoroughly and found nothing unusual inside, which somehow made the whole thing creepier to me. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the creature and what it might be doing out there in the darkness. Around midnight I heard it, a loud metallic bang from the direction of the grain silos. Then another bang, bang. It wasn't rhythmic but deliberate, like something was climbing on the metal structures or hitting them. I tiptoed to the window but couldn't see anything in the darkness. The banging continued for about 20 minutes, then stopped. I was too scared to wake my parents. The next morning, I told them about the noises. My dad walked out to check the silos, but found nothing unusual. "Probably just the wind," he said. "These old metal buildings make all kinds of noises when they expand and contract." But it wasn't windy that night. I knew what I'd heard. We lived in that house through the winter and into the spring of 2007. We never saw the creature again, but the noises continued. Not every night, but often enough. Always those same metallic bangs from the silos. Sometimes they'd be accompanied by what sounded like heavy footsteps on the gravel path that ran between the barn and the silos. My parents always found some explanation: raccoons, deer, the wind, the house settling. But I knew better. Elena knew too. She refused to go near the barn again for the entire time we lived there. When asked why, she would just say, "The big hairy man might come back." My parents eventually decided the farm life wasn't for us, and we moved back to Arizona the following summer. I was secretly relieved. Though we never had another direct encounter with the creature, I always felt watched when I was outside, especially at dusk. Years later, when I was in high school, I came across an article about Bigfoot sightings in Wyoming. There was a photo of a plaster cast of a footprint that looked exactly like what I'd seen that day. That's when I realized what we'd encountered, based on its height, towering over the barn door, the size of those prints and its behavior. I'm certain what I saw was a Sasquatch. I've measured myself against door frames since then to get perspective. A standard door is about 6 feet 8 inches tall. This thing was easily a foot taller than that, putting it over 7.5 feet. The way it moved was what sticks with me the most. Powerful but almost careful, like it was trying not to be noticed despite its size, and those arms hanging so low. No human has proportions like that. I've tried researching other sightings in that area since then. Turns out the Wind River Range and the forests around Dubois have had scattered reports over the years. Nothing conclusive, of course, but enough to make me feel less crazy about what I saw. Elena doesn't like talking about it even now. When I brought it up last Christmas, she just shook her head and said, "I don't want to remember that." Carlos was too young to recall it clearly, and my parents still think it was just some local wildlife. But I know what I saw, and sometimes, when I hear unexpected metallic noises at night, even now living in my apartment in Phoenix, my mind immediately goes back to those grain silos and what might have been out there in the Wyoming darkness, watching our family through the windows of that old farmhouse. Story 11. I've been debating whether to share this for years. It happened back in August 2003, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My buddy Mike and I were on our annual archery hunting trip in Gunnison County, Colorado. We'd been going to the same spot for about 5 years, a secluded clearing at the base of this canyon near an old logging road. The place was perfect because nobody ever went there. In all our previous trips, we'd maybe seen another hunter once. This particular trip was supposed to be 3 days. We arrived on a Friday morning, set up our camp, and spent the first 2 days hunting like normal. Nothing unusual happened. We didn't bag anything, but we saw plenty of sign and even had a couple close calls with some decent bucks. The weather was perfect. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, and crisp nights. Typical Colorado late summer. By Sunday, our last day, we were pretty beat. We'd covered a lot of ground over the weekend, probably hiked 15 miles up and down those ridges. We got back to camp around 6 in the evening, both of us completely wiped out. Mike fired up the little Coleman stove and threw on some steaks while I collected firewood. The sun was setting behind the western ridge, and that golden light was filtering through the pines. It was peaceful, you know, just two friends in the wilderness, enjoying that perfect quiet you can only find when you're miles from civilization. After dinner, we built up the fire and cracked open a couple beers. It was getting dark fast, the way it does in the mountains. The temperature was dropping, and I remember pulling my jacket tighter around my shoulders. That's when we heard it for the first time. It was this sound. I hesitate to call it a scream or a yell, because those words don't quite capture it. It was long and drawn out, lasting maybe 5 or 6 seconds, then silence for about 30 seconds, then another one. It was coming from somewhere up in the canyon, echoing off the walls. At first, we didn't think much of it. Mike said something like elk bugling early this year, but it didn't sound like elk or coyotes or a mountain lion. I've spent my whole life in Colorado. I know what the wildlife sounds like. What the hell is that? I finally asked after the 3rd or 4th call. Mike shrugged, but I could tell he was uneasy. Probably just some animal we don't usually hear. Maybe a bear. But it wasn't a bear. Bears don't make sounds like that. We sat there listening as the calls continued, still about 30 seconds apart. The unsettling part was that they were getting closer. Whatever was making that sound was moving, and it was moving directly toward us. The sound itself was hard to describe, deep and rough, almost guttural, but powerful enough to echo through the entire canyon. It had this quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. After about 20 minutes, the calls were close enough that we decided to investigate. We hopped in my truck and drove about half a mile up the logging road, killed the engine, and rolled down the windows to listen. That's when things got really weird. The sound had moved. It wasn't ahead of us anymore. It was behind us, closer to our camp than to us. Whatever this thing was, it had somehow circled around without us noticing and was now between us and our campsite. "Let's go back," Mike said, his voice tight. I could tell he was trying to sound calm, but there was an edge there I'd never heard before. I turned the truck around and drove back to camp. When we got there, the fire had died down to embers. We threw on some more wood, and I grabbed my flashlight, sweeping the beam toward the ridge west of our camp. The screaming was now maybe 200 yards away, up that slope. The sound was so loud now that I swear I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, not quite human, but not fully animal either. There was an intelligence to it, a deliberateness that scared the shit out of me. We sat there in silence, neither of us wanting to acknowledge how freaked out we were. I was mid-bite into a s'more when we heard the first branch snap. It came from the slope behind our camp, maybe 50 yards into the trees. Snap. Then another. Snap. Something big was moving through the underbrush. "It's circling us," Mike whispered. My mouth went dry. Whatever was up there, it wasn't approaching directly. It was moving around our perimeter, staying just out of sight in the darkness beyond our fire's light. More branches snapped, this time from a different direction. The thing was definitely circling our camp, and it was big. The sounds it made pushing through the brush weren't the light footfalls of a deer or even a mountain lion. This was something heavy that didn't care about being quiet. Mike and I exchanged looks across the fire. No words needed. We both knew we weren't staying the night. "Pack up now," I said, already moving toward my tent. We threw everything into the truck in record time, probably less than 10 minutes. Tents half collapsed, sleeping bags stuffed anywhere they would fit, cooler tossed haphazardly into the bed. The whole time, we could hear it moving, circling, never staying in one place for long. Then it screamed again. Jesus Christ, that sound. It was right above us now, maybe 50 yards up the slope. The sound was so powerful, it seemed to physically press against my ears. Along with it came the sound of something large pushing through the brush and small trees. Not just footsteps. This was the sound of vegetation being pushed aside, small trees actually snapping. I realized with a jolt of panic that my bow and Mike's were both in their cases in the truck bed. We had no weapons readily available. My hunting knife was in my pocket, but what good would that do against whatever this was? "Get in the truck now," I yelled, no longer caring if it heard me. We jumped in, and I fired up the engine, throwing it into reverse before Mike had even closed his door. I spun the wheel, pointing us down the logging road, and floored it. The headlights cut through the darkness as we bounced and jostled down that rough track faster than was safe. I didn't care. I just wanted distance between us and that thing. About a mile down the road, Mike finally spoke. "What the fuck was that, Jake?" I shook my head, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know. I really don't know." We drove all the way back to town that night, 3 hours on mountain roads, barely speaking. Both of us were listening, half expecting to hear that scream again, even with the engine noise. When we got back to civilization, we tried to explain what happened to our wives, to our friends. Most people dismissed it, probably just a bear, they'd say, or mountain lions can sound pretty weird. But they weren't there. They didn't hear it. Whatever was in those woods that night wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It moved deliberately. It called continuously. It showed no fear of humans or fire. It circled our camp like it was hunting us. I've been back to Gunnison County many times since then, but never to that canyon. Mike and I still hunt together every year, but we go elsewhere now. Sometimes when we're sitting around a campfire and the conversation lulls, I can tell we're both listening, both wondering if we'll hear that sound again. I still can't explain what stalked us that night. I don't have a name for it. But I know it was real, and I know it was intelligent, and I know it wanted us gone from its territory. And I've never felt more like prey than I did in those moments, throwing our gear into the truck while something massive moved through the darkness around us. I don't scare easily. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, even a moose once that nearly trampled me, but nothing has ever terrified me like whatever was in those woods that night in August 2003. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear that scream echoing through my bedroom, and it takes me hours to fall back asleep. Story 12. I've been wanting to get this off my chest for years. I rarely talk about it because people either think I'm making it up or they start with all those tired jokes about Bigfoot and beef jerky commercials. But what I saw that night in 1997 was real, and it still gives me chills thinking about it. It was mid-July of '97, and I was working as a merit badge counselor at a Boy Scout camp in central Idaho, right on the edge of the Piat National Forest. I was 22 at the time, just finished my third year of college, studying forestry. The summer job was perfect, teaching wilderness survival, orienteering, and nature studies to troops of scouts. Plus, the pay wasn't terrible for being out in the middle of nowhere. The camp itself was pretty rustic, a collection of canvas tents on wooden platforms, a main lodge for meals, and a few program areas scattered around a small lake. Beyond that was nothing but miles of forest, mountains, and some of the most beautiful wilderness I've ever seen. During the day, it was paradise. At night, though, especially away from the main camp, the darkness felt different. Heavier somehow. That night started like any other. It was a Wednesday, I remember, because we'd just finished the camp-wide game day and everyone was exhausted. I was teamed up with two other counselors, Mark and Dave, to check on a remote campsite where a troop was supposed to be spending the night for their wilderness survival badge. The site was about 1.5 miles from the main camp, following a stream that fed into the lake. The scouts had ended up not using the site because of a thunderstorm warning, but we still needed to check it and make sure everything was secure. We headed out around 9:30, just as the sun was setting. The moon was nearly full that night, so we only brought one flashlight between us. The path was narrow but clear enough, just a dirt trail that wound alongside the stream. The hike out was uneventful. We checked the site, made sure the tarps were tied down properly, and started heading back around 10:30 or so. That's when things got weird. We were walking single file. I was in the middle, Mark in front, Dave behind me. The moon was casting these weird shadows through the trees, and the only sounds were our footsteps, the stream gurgling beside us, and the occasional hoot of an owl. I remember feeling calm, just enjoying the night air and thinking about the letters I needed to write to my girlfriend back home. We'd been walking for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed something moving on the opposite bank of the stream. At first, I thought it was just shadows playing tricks on me, but then I saw it clearly, a dark figure emerging from the tree line. It was walking upright, moving with this strange, fluid motion that immediately struck me as wrong, just fundamentally wrong. It wasn't a bear. I'd seen plenty of those. It wasn't a moose or an elk. This thing was walking on two legs with a smooth, purposeful stride. The stream wasn't very wide, maybe 20 feet, and the figure was only about 50 feet away from us on the opposite bank. The moonlight was bright enough that I could make out its silhouette clearly. It was tall. I'm 6 foot, and this thing had to be at least 7 feet. It was uniformly dark, either black or a very deep brown. I couldn't make out facial features, but I could see the outline of its head, not like a human head at all. It had this high crown and rounded top. The proportions were all off for a human. Its shoulders were incredibly wide and thick, and its hips were broad too. The legs looked powerful, especially the thighs. But despite its size, it moved with this natural grace that was almost beautiful to watch. As it walked, it reached out with one arm and casually pushed aside a sapling in its path. I froze. I didn't say anything at first because I figured Mark and Dave saw it too. We all just stopped in our tracks. The figure moved back under the shadows of the trees, but I could still track its movement by the way the branches swayed. That's when Dave whispered, "Do you guys see that?" and pointed toward the exact spot where the figure had disappeared. I nodded and whispered back, "Yeah, I saw it. What the hell is that?" Mark just shook his head, his eyes wide. Then we heard it, this sharp clacking sound, like someone striking rocks together. It came from exactly where the creature had walked. Click, clack, click, clack. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm to it, almost like a signal. That sound broke whatever spell had us frozen. Mark turned and whispered urgently, "We need to go. Now." But we didn't continue on the trail. Instead, we backed away slowly, then cut through a small meadow to our right, away from the stream. We ended up in a grove of lodgepole pines about 100 yards from the trail. We crouched there, barely breathing, scanning the darkness around us. "What was that thing?" Dave whispered. "I don't know," I said. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Did you see how it moved? That wasn't a person." Mark just kept shaking his head. "We shouldn't go back on the trail. It might be waiting." So we stayed there, huddled in that grove of pines for nearly 3 hours. We didn't talk much. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made us jump. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my mind, trying to make sense of it. The way it moved didn't match anything I'd ever seen or studied. It was too fluid, too confident in the darkness. Around 1 in the morning, we finally decided we had to get back to camp. We were all freezing by then. Idaho nights get cold even in July. We each picked up thick sticks to use as makeshift weapons. Dave had a pocket knife, which seemed laughably inadequate, but it was better than nothing. We took a longer route back, staying away from the stream trail. It probably added an extra half-mile to our journey, but none of us wanted to risk encountering that thing again. We moved as quietly as possible, stopping every few minutes to listen. The forest seemed alive with sounds that night, all normal wildlife noises, but every one of them made my skin crawl. When we finally reached the edge of camp around 1:30, I've never felt such relief. We went straight to the staff cabin, woke up the camp director and told him what we'd seen. He listened patiently, but I could tell he thought we were either exaggerating or had mistaken a bear for something else. "There are a lot of strange shadows in the forest at night," he said, "especially with the full moon. Your eyes can play tricks on you." But our eyes hadn't played tricks on us. We all saw the same thing. We described it the same way, independently. That doesn't happen with hallucinations. The next morning, a few of us went back to look for tracks or evidence. Of course, it had rained lightly overnight, washing away any prints that might have been there. The forest looked completely normal in the daylight, beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the threatening darkness of the night before. For the rest of the summer, I never went near that trail alone. I'd take different routes, longer ones if necessary. The other counselors noticed and started asking questions. Eventually, the story spread through the camp, with people either finding it hilarious or genuinely unsettling. No one else reported seeing anything similar that summer, which made me question myself sometimes. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear walking upright. Bears don't move like that, and they don't have that body shape. It wasn't a person in a costume. We were miles from any road, and no one could fake that fluid movement and that clacking sound. I still hear it in my dreams sometimes. The thing that sticks with me most, even 26 years later, is how natural it looked in that environment. It wasn't stumbling through the forest. It was moving through its home, the way it pushed aside that sapling. It was so casual, so comfortable. This was a creature perfectly adapted to life in dense forest. I've been back to central Idaho many times since then, but never to that exact spot. I've researched cryptid sightings and reports of unidentified creatures in the Pacific Northwest. Some descriptions match what we saw that night, while others don't. I've become more open-minded about what might exist in the wilderness areas of North America. There are still vast stretches of forest that humans rarely enter, especially in places like Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia. I don't know what to call what we saw. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. The labels seem silly and commercialized compared to the actual experience of seeing this creature. What I do know is that it changed how I understand the natural world. There are things out there that we haven't catalogued or explained, things that have learned to avoid human contact so effectively that we can spend centuries doubting their existence. Sometimes I wonder if it was watching us that whole time we were hiding in the pines, if it could have approached us at any moment but chose not to. That thought keeps me up at night more than any horror movie ever could. I still work in forestry now, managing timberlands in Oregon. I spend a lot of time in remote areas, and I'm always alert, always listening for that distinctive clacking sound. I've never seen anything like it again, but I know it's out there, and part of me hopes I never encounter it again, because now I understand just how little we know about what lives in the deep wilderness and how powerless we really are out there. Story 13. I still get chills thinking about it. It's been 40 years, but some nights when the rain pounds on my roof, I'm transported back to that pole house near Cessnock. It was 1983, winter in New South Wales. I was 32 then, staying with my mates Dave and Sarah at their bush property in the Hunter Valley. The three of us had planned the weekend as a chance to catch up. They'd moved out there about 6 months earlier, building this beautiful elevated pole house surrounded by nothing but eucalyptus trees and wilderness. I'd driven up from Sydney on Friday afternoon, expecting a relaxing couple of days with good friends, good wine, and maybe some hiking if the weather held. It didn't. By Saturday afternoon, the sky had turned a sickly greenish grey. The weather report on the radio warned of severe storms moving across the region. We'd stocked up on supplies earlier that day, enough wine, cheese and crackers to see us through a cozy night indoors while the storm raged outside. We might lose power, Dave had said, lighting candles around the living room as a precaution. The house creaked and swayed slightly with the wind, which wasn't unusual for pole houses, but it was unsettling for a city bloke like me. By 7 that evening, it was properly pissing down. The rain hammered against the tin roof so loudly we had to raise our voices to hear each other. Lightning flashed every few minutes, briefly illuminating the pitch-black forest that surrounded us. Between those flashes, you couldn't see a bloody thing out there. "You're lucky you came this weekend," Sarah joked, pouring more wine. "You get to experience authentic bush living, complete with biblical storms." We'd been talking about local folklore earlier. Dave mentioned something about Yowies, Australia's version of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Apparently the Hunter Valley had a long history of sightings. The original owners had warned them when they bought the property. "Load of rubbish," I'd laughed. "Just stories to scare the tourists." David shrugged. "The Aboriginal blokes who helped build this place wouldn't work after dark. Said this area was bad country, that something big lived in these woods." I remember rolling my eyes. I'd always been the skeptical one in our group. It must have been around 9:30 when we first heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving something on the veranda. A steady thump, thump, thump. We all stopped talking. "Probably a branch," Sarah said, but her voice had that forced casualness that told me she didn't believe it. Dave got up and peered through the front window curtains. "Can't see anything. It's too dark out there." The thumping stopped for maybe 30 seconds, then started again, louder this time. Rhythmic, deliberate. Thump, thump, thump. "That's not a branch," I said, putting my wine glass down. Then came the distinct sound of weight shifting on the wooden boards of the veranda. Something heavy. The entire house seemed to list slightly to one side. Sarah clutched Dave's arm. "Someone's out there." Dave grabbed a cricket bat from behind the sofa. I picked up a heavy flashlight, one of those old metal ones that could double as a weapon if needed. "Hello?" Dave called out. "Who's there?" No response, just another heavy shift of weight on the boards outside. Then something scraped along the outer wall. It sounded like it was moving toward the side of the house. "I'm calling the police," Sarah whispered, moving toward the phone on the kitchen wall. That's when we smelled it. Jesus Christ, that smell. I've worked on farms. I've cleaned up roadkill. Nothing compares to what came wafting through the partially open kitchen window. It was like rotting meat, wet dog, and something musky and wild all mixed together, the kind of stench that hits you like a physical force. Sarah gagged and covered her mouth. Dave rushed to the kitchen window to close it, but froze halfway there. "What the fuck?" he whispered. I moved beside him, flashlight clutched so tightly my knuckles were white. Through the rain-streaked window, we could just make out a dark shape huddled in the corner of the veranda. It was massive, hunched over to fit under the roof. In the dim light spilling from our window, I could see what looked like dark, matted fur soaked through from the rain. Sarah was behind us now. "What is it?" she hissed. "I don't know," Dave said, his voice barely audible over the rain, "but it's fucking big." As if sensing our attention, the thing shifted. I caught a glimpse of what might have been a face, not human, not quite animal either. Just a darker patch in the silhouette, with what looked like eyes reflecting the faint light. "Get away from the window," I said, pulling them both back. Sarah was shaking. "It's a Yowie, isn't it? It's actually fucking real." I wanted to tell her she was being ridiculous, but the evidence was right there on their veranda. Whatever it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I recognized. "It's just sheltering from the storm," Dave reasoned, though his voice cracked. "It'll leave when the rain stops." "And when will that be?" Sarah snapped. The radio had said the storm front would last through the night. We stood there in tense silence for several minutes, listening to the occasional shuffling sounds from outside. The thing seemed to be settling in, making itself comfortable on their veranda. "We need to scare it off," I finally said. Dave nodded and started banging on the wall. "Hey, get out of here!" he shouted. I joined in, yelling and making as much noise as possible. Sarah grabbed a pot and wooden spoon from the kitchen and added to the racket. For a moment, nothing happened. Then we heard it. A low, rumbling growl that cut through our noise and the storm outside. It wasn't like any animal I'd heard before. It was deep, almost like it came from a chest the size of a barrel. We stopped our noise-making instantly. "Fuck this," Dave whispered. "I'm getting my shotgun." He kept an old double barrel for snakes and feral pigs. He retrieved it from the locked cabinet in their bedroom and loaded it with trembling hands. "You're not going to shoot it," Sarah said. Half question, half statement. "Just to scare it," Dave assured her, though I noticed he loaded actual shells, not blanks. The three of us moved back to the front door. Dave positioned himself to open it quickly while I stood ready with the flashlight. Sarah had the phone in her hand, ready to call for help. "On three," Dave said. "1, 2, 3. He flung the door open. I shined the flashlight out while Dave pointed the shotgun. Nothing. The veranda was empty. "Where'd it go?" Sarah whispered. A heavy thud from beneath the house answered her question. The floor vibrated under our feet. "It's under the house now," I said, stating the obvious. Dave slammed the door shut and locked it. Fuck. The pole house design meant there was a significant space between the ground and the floor, maybe 6 or 7 feet. Plenty of room for something large to shelter. We could hear it moving around down there, occasionally bumping against the support beams. The smell was less intense now, but still present, wafting up through the floorboards. "I'm calling the police," Sarah decided, dialing the number. I heard her trying to explain the situation without sounding insane. "Yes, someone or something is hiding under our house. No, we don't think it's a person. Yes, I know how that sounds." They agreed to send someone, but we could tell from Sarah's face they weren't rushing. For the next hour, we tried everything to drive it away. We stomped on the floor, blasted music, even poured hot water through the gaps in the floorboards. The thing would move away temporarily, but then settle somewhere else beneath us. It was the longest night of my life. None of us slept. We took turns watching, listening to the movements below. Sometimes it would go quiet for so long we'd think it had left, only to hear a sudden scrape or thump that sent our hearts racing again. Around 3 in the morning, the rain finally began to ease. We hoped the creature would leave with the storm, but it seemed content in its shelter. "The police said they'd be here first thing in the morning," Sarah whispered. She was curled up on the sofa, clutching a cushion to her chest. "If that thing's still here when the sun comes up, I'm going down there," Dave said grimly, patting the shotgun. I didn't like that idea one bit. "Let's wait for the police, mate." We must have dozed off despite ourselves because the sound of tires on gravel jolted us awake. Dawn was just breaking, the sky a pale grey through the windows. "Police are here," Sarah said, rushing to the front window. The patrol car pulled up in front of the house, headlights cutting through the early morning mist. As the beams swept across the clearing, we heard a commotion beneath us, a frantic scrabbling, then something large crashing through the underbrush around the house. By the time the two officers reached our door, whatever had spent the night under the house was gone. "It ran off when your car pulled up," Dave told them, pointing to the tree line. The older officer, a weathered bloke named Constable Mitchell, looked skeptical but professional. "And what exactly was it that you saw?" We described what we could: the size, the fur, the smell. We showed them the muddy footprints on the veranda. Massive things, almost circular, but with what looked like toes spread wide, pressing deep into the wood. Constable Mitchell studied them, his face unreadable. "Probably a feral pig," he said finally. "They can get pretty big out here." His younger partner was examining the ground beneath the house. "There's something odd about these tracks, sir," he called up. The older cop joined him, and they conferred quietly. I saw the younger one taking photos with a small camera. When they came back up, Constable Mitchell's demeanor had changed subtly. "Look, we'll file a report, but there's not much we can do if it's gone. My advice? Keep your doors locked, windows closed. If it comes back, call us immediately." As they were leaving, the younger officer hung back. "You're not the first, you know," he said quietly. "There's been other reports in this area. The older folks won't come out here after dark." After they left, we searched the perimeter of the house. We found where it had been sheltering, a depression in the dirt, surrounded by strange, musky-smelling fur, caught on the rough wood of the support poles. Dave collected some in a plastic bag, though I'm not sure what he ever did with it. I left that afternoon, cutting my visit short. None of us had slept, and I couldn't bear the thought of another night there. Dave and Sarah sold the house 6 months later, moving back to Newcastle. They never directly connected it to what happened, but I knew. To this day, I can't explain what we encountered. I've read about Yowie since then, Australia's ape man, our version of Bigfoot, and much of what I've read matches our experience. But reading about something and coming face to face with it are very different things. Sometimes when I'm camping and hear something moving in the bush at night, that smell comes back to me, that wild, primal stench. And I wonder if it's out there, watching, waiting for the next storm to drive it toward human shelter. I don't camp much anymore. Story 14. I've kept this to myself for over 30 years, but I need to get it off my chest. It happened in April of 1991, when I was just 10 years old. We lived in this rural area in Tennessee, miles from anything you'd call a town. Our property backed up to hundreds of acres of dense forest, with this steep ravine that dropped off into a hollow behind our house. My parents both worked, so I spent a lot of time entertaining myself outside after school. That day started like any other spring afternoon. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold. I remember because I was wearing just a t-shirt and jeans, no jacket. I had this BB gun my dad got me for Christmas. Nothing fancy, just a daisy pump action that I carried everywhere. I was obsessed with it. My mom was inside making dinner, and I was out in the backyard, pretending to be some kind of soldier or hunter. I wasn't supposed to go near the ravine edge alone, but you know how kids are. The rules seemed stupid to me back then. I thought I was invincible. There was this massive boulder at the edge of our property, right before the ground dropped off into the ravine. It was my favorite spot, about 4 feet tall and flat on top, perfect for a lookout post. I climbed up there all the time, even though my parents would have freaked if they knew how close to the edge I was playing. I was up on that boulder, pretending to shoot at imaginary targets in the trees. I remember pumping the BB gun exactly 10 times, the maximum, and aiming it down into the hollow. I was making these ridiculous sound effects with my mouth, you know, like kids do, the whole pew-pew thing. God, I was so oblivious. That's when I heard it. A branch snapped to my right, maybe 15 or 20 feet away, not like when a squirrel or rabbit moves through the underbrush. This was loud, like something heavy had stepped on a decent-sized branch. I turned toward the sound, initially thinking it might be a deer. We had tons of them in the area, and I was hoping to spot one to tell my dad about later. But what I saw instead... I'm getting goosebumps just typing this out. There was something crouched at the edge of the tree line. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was hunched over, but even in that position, it was about 5 feet tall, taller than me at the time. It was covered in this long, coarse-looking hair. The color is hard to describe. Kind of a dirty beige or dusty gray, like old rabbit fur that's gotten dirty and matted. But the head, that's what I remember most vividly. It wasn't round like a person's or an ape's. It came to this weird point at the top, almost like a cone or dome. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Not in any book, not in any documentary about known animals. We locked eyes, or at least I think we did. I couldn't make out its eyes clearly from where I was, but I felt it looking at me. My whole body went cold. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was like time stopped for a few seconds. Then everything happened at once. As soon as it realized I'd spotted it, the thing turned and bolted back into the woods. It didn't move like a bear or any animal I was familiar with. It moved with this urgent strength, powerful and deliberate. I can still hear the sound of it crashing through the underbrush, breaking branches, heavy footsteps pounding the ground. I don't remember climbing down from that boulder. 1 second I was frozen in place, and the next I was sprinting toward our house, running faster than I ever had before. My BB gun was still clutched in my hand, but I knew it was useless against whatever that thing was. My heart was hammering in my chest so hard I thought it might explode. The whole time I was running, I could hear it moving through the woods parallel to me. It wasn't chasing me exactly, more like it was getting away too, but we were headed in similar directions. The sounds of breaking branches and heavy footfalls seemed to be keeping pace with me for at least part of my sprint home. I burst through our back door, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. My mom was at the stove cooking and jumped when I came crashing in. I was hysterical, trying to explain what I'd seen between gasps for air. I must have sounded completely insane. Something in the woods, by the ravine, it was watching me. To her credit, my mom didn't dismiss me outright. She could tell I was genuinely terrified, but she tried to calm me down, suggesting it was probably just a bear. We did have black bears in the area occasionally, but I knew better. I'd seen bears before. This wasn't a bear. I begged her to come back out with me. Looking back, I don't know why I wanted to go back there, but I needed her to see the evidence, to know I wasn't making it up. I ran to my dad's gun cabinet and grabbed his 20-gauge shotgun. I'd been taught basic gun safety, but I'd never actually fired the shotgun. Still, having it made me feel slightly safer. My mom was reluctant, but she could see how important this was to me. She grabbed the car keys. She always kept them in her pocket, a habit from her college days in the city, and followed me outside. I led her to the ravine, clutching that shotgun like my life depended on it. My hands were shaking so bad I probably couldn't have hit the broadside of a barn. When we got to the spot where I'd seen the creature, I pointed out where it had been standing. That's when we noticed several branches broken at about shoulder height, too high for a deer, too low for an adult human. There were these drag marks in the dirt too, like something heavy had slipped down the hillside in its hurry to get away. My mom was getting visibly uncomfortable. This wasn't adding up to be a deer or a bear. We followed along the edge of the ravine and discovered this small spillway that ran down into the hollow. The ground there was damper because of the water runoff, and that's where we found it. A partial footprint pressed into the mud. It wasn't huge like you hear about in Bigfoot stories. It was about a size 6 in length, not much bigger than my mum's foot. But it wasn't a human print. It only had 3 toes that we could see clearly. The rest of the print was smudged, but those 3 toes were unmistakable. My mum went pale. She grabbed my arm and said we needed to go back to the house. I didn't argue. We hurried back, and she called my dad at work. I remember her trying to sound calm on the phone, but I could tell she was rattled. Just come home when you can. No, nothing's wrong exactly. We just found something strange in the woods. We spent the rest of the afternoon inside. I sat by the window, staring out at the tree line, half expecting to see that pointed head emerge from the foliage. My dad got home about an hour later, and my mom explained what we'd found. He grabbed his hunting rifle and went to check it out. But by then, it had started to rain and the footprint was mostly washed away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every crack or groan of our old house made me jump. I kept imagining that thing watching me through my bedroom window, even though my room was on the second floor. I ended up dragging my sleeping bag into my parents' room and sleeping on their floor. I hadn't done that since I was 5. The next day, my dad and I went back and searched the area more thoroughly. We didn't find any more footprints, but we did discover what looked like a rough path through the underbrush, heading deeper into the ravine. The vegetation was pushed aside and broken in a way that seemed deliberate, not like a game trail. My dad took some photos with his Polaroid camera, but they didn't really show much, just broken branches and disturbed ground. For weeks after, I refused to play near the ravine. I stayed in the front yard where I could see the road and our neighbors' houses in the distance. Eventually, like most childhood traumas, the fear faded enough that I could function normally. But I never went back to that boulder alone. We never reported it to anyone official. Who would we tell? The local sheriff would have laughed it off. My parents didn't want us to become those crazy people in town who claimed to see monsters. But they didn't dismiss what I saw either. My dad even bought a motion-activated floodlight for the backyard the following weekend. I've spent years trying to rationalize what I encountered that day. Could it have been a person in some kind of costume? Maybe. But why would someone do that in the middle of nowhere, on private property? A bear standing on its hind legs, the pointed head and the way it moved rule that out. Some undiscovered primate in Tennessee. It seems far-fetched, but so does every other explanation. The thing that convinces me it was real, that I didn't imagine it, was my mom's reaction to the footprint. She was a practical, no-nonsense woman who didn't believe in monsters or myths. But she saw something that day that scared her, something she couldn't explain. I'm 31 now, with kids of my own. We live in the suburbs, far from any dense forests or ravines. Sometimes I wonder if that's a coincidence, or if I subconsciously chose a place where we'd never encounter anything like what I saw that day. My oldest is almost the age I was then. And sometimes when he's playing in our fenced backyard, I find myself scanning the perimeter, making sure nothing is watching from the shadows. I've never told my kids about what happened. How do you explain something like that? Daddy once saw a monster, but don't worry, it probably won't find us here. But sometimes when we're camping or hiking, I keep them closer than other parents might. I'm always listening for that sound. The snap of a branch that doesn't fit with the normal forest noises. I don't know what I saw that day. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, some unknown species. The label doesn't really matter. What matters is that it was real. It was there. And for a few seconds, our worlds collided. Sometimes I wonder if it thinks about me too. The small human boy. It startled on a spring day back in 1991. Does it tell its children about the strange creature it encountered? Does it keep them away from the edges of human habitation, just as I keep my children away from the deep woods? I'll probably never know what it was. But I know what I saw, what my mom saw, and nothing will ever convince me otherwise. Something was in those woods, something that wasn't supposed to exist. And sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I still hear those heavy footsteps and breaking branches in my dreams. Story 15. I've kept this to myself for so long that it feels strange finally writing it down. I guess enough time has passed now, 27 years, but I still get chills thinking about what my buddy Mark and I saw in the Utah wilderness back in '96. We were on what was supposed to be a routine hike through the Escalante Wilderness area in June of 1996. Mark and I had been hiking together for years, probably close to a decade by then. We were experienced, the kind of guys who actually knew what we were doing out there. We'd hiked most of the major trails in Utah, Colorado, and even did sections of the Pacific Crest. This was just supposed to be another adventure to add to our collection. We had planned a 5-day trek through a remote section between the Gulch and Deer Creek. The landscape there is something else. All red-tan sandstone, these dramatic rock formations that make you feel like you're walking on Mars or something. It's beautiful but harsh. The kind of place where you need to know what you're doing with water management and navigation. It was our 3rd day out. The weather had been perfect. Mid-70s, clear skies, just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. We'd gotten an early start that morning, maybe around 6, because we wanted to cross this high bench area before the real heat of the day set in. You don't mess around with midday sun in southern Utah in June. We'd been making good time, probably covered about 4 miles by 9 in the morning. We were crossing this exposed bench, basically a flat elevated area between 2 drainage systems. From up there you could see for miles in almost every direction. The red rocks, the sparse vegetation, occasional juniper trees twisted into these crazy shapes from years of wind. The silence out there is complete except for the wind and your own footsteps. I remember stopping to adjust my pack and take a drink when Mark froze beside me. He's not the jumpy type, so when I saw him go still like that, I immediately paid attention. "Don't move," he whispered. "Look over there." He nodded toward a stone outcropping maybe 200 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the typical rock formations that make up that landscape. But then something moved, and I felt my stomach drop. There was a figure moving along the top of the outcropping. The thing that struck me immediately, and I mean this hit me like a physical shock, was its color. It was paper white, not tan, not light brown, not gray. White, like freshly fallen snow white. In a landscape that's nothing but rusty reds, tans, and dusty greens, this thing stood out like a beacon. My first thought was that it was another hiker wearing some kind of white clothing, but that made no sense. Who wears bright white hiking in the desert? And it moved wrong. The movements weren't quite right for a person. It appeared to be searching for something, moving deliberately, stopping occasionally to look down at the ground or reach down with its arms. It was hard to judge the size from that distance, but something about the proportions seemed off. The arms looked too long, the body too bulky for its height. We stood there frozen for maybe 30 seconds, just watching this thing move around. Then suddenly it stopped. I swear it turned and looked directly at us, though I couldn't make out facial features at that distance. There was just this moment where I knew with absolute certainty that it had spotted us. The thing immediately ducked behind the rocks and disappeared from view. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered. I didn't have an answer. My mouth had gone completely dry. We debated what to do. The smart thing would have been to turn around and head back the way we came, but that would have meant an extra day of hiking, and we were on a schedule. Plus, I don't know if it was stubbornness or curiosity, but neither of us wanted to admit we were spooked enough to change our plans. So we decided to continue westward toward our planned descent to Deer Creek, but we'd give that outcropping a wide berth. No need to go investigating whatever the hell we'd just seen. We walked in silence for the next half hour, both of us constantly scanning the landscape. I kept expecting to see that white figure appear again, but there was nothing, just the empty wilderness stretching out around us. We started our descent toward Deer Creek around 10:30. The trail, if you could call it that, wound down a moderately steep slope with a few switchbacks. We were maybe half a mile down when I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hair on my arms stood up, and I had this overwhelming urge to turn around. When I did, my blood went cold. There it was again. The white figure was standing on the ridge we'd just left, perfectly silhouetted against the blue sky. It was just watching us, standing completely still except for what looked like its head tracking our movement. From this angle and distance, I could see it better. It was tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. The white coloration covered its entire body. It wasn't wearing clothes. The whiteness was its skin or fur or whatever. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Too broad in the shoulders, arms hanging too low, legs slightly bent in a way that looked uncomfortable. "Mark," I said quietly. He was a few steps ahead of me. He turned, followed my gaze, and cursed under his breath. The moment we both looked at it, the thing ducked down again, disappearing behind the ridge with surprising speed for something so large. "We need to move faster," Mark said, and I didn't argue. We picked up our pace, half jogging down the slope despite the risk of turning an ankle on the uneven terrain. My heart was pounding, and not just from the exertion. I kept looking back over my shoulder, expecting to see that white figure following us down the slope. We reached the bottom of the descent around 11:15 and immediately pushed on toward Deer Creek. The terrain changed here, more vegetation, some trees providing occasional shade. We should have felt safer with more cover, but somehow it was worse. Now the thing could be hiding anywhere, and we wouldn't see it until we were right on top of it. We stopped only once, briefly, to refill our water bottles at the creek. Neither of us said much. What was there to say? We'd both seen it, and neither of us had any explanation. The rest of the day was a blur of anxious hiking. We covered way more ground than we'd planned, pushing ourselves to get as far from that area as possible. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the brush had us both jumping. I kept seeing flashes of white in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. We made camp that night in a small clearing about 2 miles farther than our original planned stop. We should have been exhausted, but sleep was impossible. We took turns keeping watch. Though neither of us explicitly said what we were watching for, nothing happened that night or for the rest of the trip. We finished our hike a day early and barely spoke about what we'd seen. It was like we both tacitly agreed to process it on our own. It wasn't until weeks later, when we were back in civilization and having beers on my deck, that Mark finally brought it up. "What do you think that thing was in Escalante?" he asked. I'd been thinking about it almost constantly. "I don't know. Some kind of albino animal, maybe?" Mark shook his head. "It was walking on 2 legs, standing upright." "A bear can stand on its hind legs," I offered, but the explanation sounded weak even to me. "For that long, and moving like that." Mark took a long drink of his beer. "And bears aren't paper white." We went back and forth like this for a while, proposing and rejecting various explanations. Eventually, we let it drop again. What was the point? We had no proof, no photos. Our cameras were packed away in our backpacks when it happened. Nothing but our memories of something that shouldn't exist. I wrote about the encounter in my hiking journal the night it happened, trying to document every detail while it was still fresh. Reading those pages now, I can still feel the shock and confusion in my hurried handwriting. Years passed. I kept hiking, even returned to the Escalante region several times, though I always found excuses to avoid that specific area between the Gulch and Deer Creek. I never saw anything like that white figure again. Then, in 2004, I was having drinks with a friend who's really into cryptozoology and all that stuff. I've never been into Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster or any of that, but as the night wore on and we got a few beers in us, I found myself telling him about what Mark and I had seen in '96. I expected him to laugh it off, but instead he got really serious and started asking specific questions about the location, the creature's movements, its proportions. Then he pulled out his laptop and showed me something that made my skin crawl. Reports from other hikers and campers in the Rocky Mountains and Southwest who claimed to have seen white Sasquatch figures. I'd never connected what we saw to Bigfoot. In my mind, Bigfoot was this Pacific Northwest thing, a dark-haired ape-man lumbering through dense forests, not a paper-white creature in the red rock desert of southern Utah. But the descriptions matched in so many ways. The unusual proportions, the way it moved, the sense of intelligence in how it hid once spotted, and the white coloration, which I thought made our sighting unique, turned out to be reported by others in that general region. I still don't know what to believe. I'm not the type to jump to supernatural explanations, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't any known animal I'm familiar with. Sometimes when I'm hiking alone now, especially in open country where you can see a long way, I'll get that feeling again, that sensation of being watched. I'll turn quickly, hoping to catch something, but there's never anything there, just the landscape, empty and indifferent. But I know what Mark and I saw that day in Escalante. That stark white figure, so out of place against the red rocks, watching us with what felt like purpose and intelligence. It's been 27 years, and I still don't have an explanation. I just know that whatever it was, it didn't belong there, or maybe it did, and we were the intruders. Either way, that memory remains vivid and unsettling, a strange encounter in a remote corner of the wilderness that I can't explain to this day. Story 16. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal or cryptids. Sure, I'd heard all the stories growing up in Western Washington. This whole region is Bigfoot country if you listen to the locals, but I always chalked it up to overactive imaginations, misidentified bears, or just plain old tall tales. That changed last August. I live in a small house just off Highway 12, about 3 miles outside of Elmer. It's nothing fancy, just a single story with a decent porch and about an acre of land that backs up to thick forest. The highway isn't super busy, especially in the evenings, which is why I've always loved it here. Peaceful, you know. On August 23rd of last year, I was doing some routine maintenance around the house before dark. The days were getting shorter, and I noticed my porch light had burned out. It wasn't completely dark yet, that weird twilight time when everything starts getting hazy and grey. I grabbed my stepladder from the garage and headed to the porch to change the bulb. My 2 cats, Luna and Jasper, were doing their usual evening prowl around the yard. They're indoor-outdoor cats and pretty brave. Luna especially likes to hunt in the tall grass near the tree line. I was up on the ladder, struggling with the fixture cover, when I heard this sound from across the highway. It's hard to describe exactly, a sharp cracking, like someone breaking thick branches, but with real force behind it, not like a twig snapping under a deer's hoof. This was deliberate and powerful. I paused, bulb in hand, and looked across the road toward the sound. The woods across from my place are dense, mostly Douglas fir, some cedar, and thick undergrowth. There's a small break in the trees about 50 yards in where an old logging road cuts through. That's where the sound was coming from. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening and watching. Then I heard more cracking, louder this time. That's when Luna and Jasper came tearing across the yard like they were being chased. I've never seen them move so fast. Luna practically scaled my leg to get onto the porch, and Jasper hid under the porch swing. Both of them were puffed up, tails like bottle brushes. "What's got into you two?" I asked, looking back toward the woods. That's when I saw it. In that gap between the trees where the old logging road cuts through, something massive moved from left to right. At first my brain tried to make sense of it. Was it a bear, an elk? But no. This thing was walking upright on 2 legs, with a stride that was unmistakably not human but not animal either. I'm not exaggerating when I say this thing was huge. I'd guess around 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, and what struck me immediately were its arms. They hung down almost to its knees. Not like a gorilla exactly, but definitely not human proportions. The light was fading, but I could clearly see that this thing wasn't dark, like most Sasquatch are reported to be. Its hair, fur, I don't know what to call it, was a light tan color, almost blonde in places, with patches that looked off-white or gray. It reminded me of a palomino horse in a weird way. I completely forgot about the light bulb. I just stood frozen on that ladder, watching this creature walk along the edge of the highway. It wasn't rushing or looking around nervously like you'd expect from a wild animal near a road. It moved with purpose, with this weird, fluid grace that made no sense for something so large. I don't know if it knew I was watching. It never turned toward my property. It just continued its deliberate pace until it disappeared behind a clump of alder trees about 100 yards down the highway. The whole sighting probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like time had stretched out. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. When it finally disappeared from view, I practically fell off the ladder getting down. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the new bulb and it shattered on the porch. I grabbed both cats and went inside, locking the door behind me. I spent the next hour pacing around my living room, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a guy in a ghillie suit. But who would be wandering around in the woods like that at dusk, and that size? No human is built like that. A bear walking on its hind legs. But the movement was all wrong, too fluid, too purposeful. I didn't sleep much that night. Every crack and rustle outside had me jumping. I kept replaying the sighting in my mind, second-guessing myself. Was it really as big as I thought? Was the color accurate in that fading light? But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. I know what I saw. The next morning, I went across the highway to look for tracks or signs. I'm no tracker, but I figured something that size must leave evidence. The ground was pretty dry though, and the logging road is mostly packed dirt and gravel. I found some broken branches high up, like 7 feet off the ground, but nothing conclusive. For weeks afterward, I kept the encounter to myself. Around here, you don't just casually mention seeing a Sasquatch unless you want to become the town joke. I'd always been the skeptic, the one who rolled my eyes at the local Bigfoot stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. My cats changed after that day. They used to roam freely all over the property, even venturing toward the tree line. Now they stay close to the house, and Luna refuses to go out after about 4 in the afternoon. Animals know things we don't, I guess. I started paying more attention to local gossip too. Overheard conversations at the diner in Elmer, comments at the feed store. There were whispers about strange sounds in the forests, livestock acting spooked for no reason. Things I would have dismissed before now took on new meaning. Then, in late October, I got confirmation I wasn't losing my mind. I was at Wilson's Hardware when I overheard Sheriff Brennan talking to the owner. I've known Dan Brennan casually for years. He lives about 5 miles from me on a small farm with some horses and cattle. He's the county sheriff, not the type to make up stories or exaggerate. He was describing something he'd seen on his property the previous week. A large bipedal creature with dirty blonde hair. Said it was standing at the edge of his pasture in the early morning fog, watching his horses. When it spotted him, it turned and walked into the woods. My blood ran cold. I abandoned my shopping and approached him, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. I asked him about what he'd just described, and he seemed hesitant at first, probably worried I was going to mock him. But when I told him about what I'd seen in August, his whole demeanor changed. "So I'm not crazy," he said, relief washing over his face. We ended up talking for almost an hour. His description matched mine exactly. The height, the long arms, and especially the unusual coloring. He told me something he hadn't mentioned to the hardware store owner. He'd tracked the thing after seeing it. Being a sheriff and an experienced hunter, Dan knew how to follow signs. He tracked the creature for about a mile through his back pasture and into the forest beyond. He found where it had crossed a barbed wire fence separating his property from state land. The wire was bent down, and caught on one of the barbs were several strands of coarse hair, pale tan, just like we'd both described. Whatever this thing was, he told me, it weighed enough to bend that fence wire like it was nothing, and that fence is high tensile steel. Dan had collected the hair samples, intending to send them for analysis, but admitted he hadn't followed through. "Who would I even send them to without looking like a lunatic?" he asked. I understood completely. Since then, I've become hyper-aware of my surroundings, especially at dusk. I installed motion sensor lights all around my property and a game camera facing the woods across the highway. The cameras caught deer, coyotes, even a cougar once, but nothing like what we saw. I find myself scanning the tree line constantly when I'm outside. Sometimes I think I catch glimpses of movement in the woods, or hear those distinctive cracking sounds again, but nothing as clear as that August evening. I've lived in this area my whole life and never gave much credence to the Sasquatch stories. Now I can't stop thinking about them. How many of those tales were real sightings? How many people saw something they couldn't explain and kept quiet for fear of ridicule? What's strangest to me is that this creature, whatever it was, seemed completely at ease. It wasn't running or hiding. It was just walking, like it had every right to be there, like that was its normal routine. That makes me wonder how long it's been out there, how many times it's passed by without me noticing. I don't know what to do with this experience. I haven't reported it officially. Who would I even tell, and what would they do? I don't want a bunch of cryptid hunters or thrill seekers tramping around trying to track this thing down. Whatever it is, it hasn't bothered anyone that I know of. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever see it again. Part of me hopes I do, to confirm that I'm not crazy, that what I saw was real. Another part hopes I never encounter it up close. I still go out on my porch in the evenings, but now I find myself listening more intently, watching the gaps between the trees across the highway. Whatever walks in those woods isn't supposed to exist, but I saw it. Sheriff Brennan saw it, and now I can't unsee it or forget those long arms, that fluid stride, that pale tan hair catching the last light of day as it moved silently along Highway 12. Story 17. I still can't believe I'm finally sharing this. It's been 17 years, and I've only told a handful of people because, well, you know how it goes. Either they think you're crazy or they laugh it off. But what happened that night in the fall of 2006 still haunts me, and I need to get it off my chest. I was a sophomore at Sheridan College in Wyoming back then, just a normal guy trying to get through school, hanging out with friends, and enjoying the incredible landscape around us. Wyoming's beautiful in the fall, all those colors against the mountains, perfect weather for hiking and camping. That's exactly what my buddy Jake and I had been doing that Saturday. We'd spent the day up in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains at this spot called Hidden Falls that the locals knew about. Nothing crazy, just grilling some burgers, drinking a few beers. Yeah, we were underage, but who wasn't? And shooting the shit about classes and girls, normal college stuff. We stayed later than planned, watching the sunset behind the mountains. It was peaceful, you know, one of those perfect days you don't want to end. By the time we packed up, it was getting dark fast. We didn't leave until around 11:30. I was driving my pickup, a '98 Ford F-150 that I'd saved up for through high school. Had it lifted with these big mud tires I was super proud of. Jake was already half asleep in the passenger seat as we headed back toward campus. The road from the foothills back to Sheridan is winding, lots of sharp curves and dips. No streetlights, just pure darkness, except for my headlights and the moon when it peeked through the trees. We were about 20 minutes out from campus on this stretch called Wolf Creek Road. It's narrow, thick forest on both sides, the kind of place that's beautiful during the day, but feels like something from a horror movie at night. I remember checking the time. It was almost exactly midnight. I had to slow down for this particularly sharp curve, and that's when it happened. My headlights swept across the tree line as I turned, and there it was. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Standing just off the shoulder of the road, partially illuminated by my high beams, was something massive, something that had no business existing in those woods. I actually jerked the wheel a bit and had to correct to stay on the road. Jake, who'd been dozing, sat up immediately. "Holy shit," I whispered. "Are you seeing this?" Jake didn't answer. He was frozen, staring out the windshield. It was tall, so damn tall. I'm not exaggerating when I say it had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet high, and that was with it slightly hunched over. If it had stood up straight, God knows how tall it would have been. But the height wasn't even the most shocking part. It was the width of the thing. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, at least 3 feet across. I've played football with some big guys, seen wrestlers, weightlifters. Nobody has shoulders like that. Not even close. It was covered in this dark brown hair or fur that hung several inches from its body. What struck me was how the moonlight hit it. There was this weird silvery sheen to the fur that made it look like it was shifting, almost glowing in places. We were only able to see it for maybe 3 or 4 seconds as we rounded that curve, but I swear it turned its head toward us. I couldn't make out facial features clearly, just this massive hair-covered head on that wide-shouldered body. But I felt it looking at us. I felt its eyes tracking our truck as we passed. Jake finally broke the silence. What the actual fuck was that? His voice was shaking. I couldn't answer. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I was driving way too fast suddenly, wanting to get away from that spot as quickly as possible. Dan, seriously, what did we just see? Jake kept looking back through the rear window, but the curve in the road had already taken us out of view. I don't know, I managed to say. A bear, maybe? Even as I said it, I knew it was bullshit. That was no bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have that body shape, and they sure as hell don't have shoulders 3 feet wide. That wasn't a bear, man. Jake's voice had dropped to almost a whisper. That was... He couldn't finish the sentence. I knew what he was thinking. We both knew, but saying it out loud felt wrong somehow, like it would make it too real. We drove the rest of the way back to campus in almost complete silence. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something massive running after us on the road. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When we got back to the dorms, we sat in my truck for a while, engine off, just trying to process what had happened. Finally, Jake looked at me. "Bigfoot," he said. "We just saw a fucking Sasquatch." Hearing him say it sent a chill down my spine, because he was right. What else could it have been? I'd seen all the documentaries, heard the stories around campfires. I'd always thought they were just that, stories. But what we'd seen standing by that road was exactly what people had been describing for decades. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying those few seconds over and over in my head, the sheer size of it, those impossibly wide shoulders. The way its fur had that strange silvery quality in the moonlight, and worst of all, that feeling that it had been looking right at us. The next morning, I convinced Jake we should go back. In daylight, everything would make more sense. Maybe it was just a weird shadow, or our minds playing tricks after a long day and a few beers. We drove out there around noon. The spot looked so different in daylight. Just trees and dirt and fallen leaves. Nothing unusual. We pulled over where we thought we'd seen it and checked the area. The ground was hard-packed with pine needles and rocks, not the kind of surface that would show footprints easily. But there was this one area where some branches were broken about 7 feet up, way higher than a person could reach without really trying, and we found something else. A smell. It's hard to describe, but if you've ever been around wild animals at the zoo, it was like that but more musky, not like a dead animal or anything rotting, more like an incredibly strong body odor mixed with something earthy. It was concentrated in this one spot, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. We didn't stay long. The place felt wrong somehow, like we were being watched. Jake felt it too. We got back in the truck without finding anything definitive, but that just made it worse. At least if we'd found giant footprints, we could have shown someone. Over the next few weeks, I became obsessed. I started researching Bigfoot sightings in the Bighorn Mountains area. Turns out there had been quite a few over the years. The Crow and Cheyenne people from that region have stories about giant, hairy men living in the mountains that go back centuries. Modern sightings started getting reported in the 1970s and never really stopped. One account from 2003 described almost exactly what we'd seen. The massive shoulders, the height, even that strange silvery quality to the fur in moonlight. Reading that made my skin crawl. This wasn't just in my head. I tried telling a couple other friends about what happened, but I could see the disbelief in their eyes. One guy actually laughed and asked how much we'd had to drink. After that, I stopped talking about it. Jake did too. We'd occasionally bring it up when we were alone, trying to make sense of it, but eventually we just stopped. It was easier to pretend it never happened. But I still think about that night all the time. I've never gone back to that spot on Wolf Creek Road alone. I've driven through there in groups during daylight, but never at night, never by myself. I can't. The thing that sticks with me most isn't even seeing the creature itself. It's what happened after. For about a month following that night, I kept having this recurring nightmare. I'd be driving that same road, see the same figure, but in the dream, I'd stop the truck. I'd get out and walk toward it. It would turn fully toward me, and I'd see its face clearly. I never remembered the face when I woke up, just the feeling of absolute terror that came with seeing it. I transferred to the University of Wyoming the next year, told everyone it was for the better engineering program, but honestly, I just couldn't stay in Sheridan anymore. Every time I drove those back roads, I'd find myself scanning the tree line, my heart rate spiking whenever I'd see movement in the woods. Jake and I lost touch after I transferred. Last I heard, he moved to California, about as far from the Wyoming wilderness as he could get. I don't blame him. I'm 29 now. I've got a job, an apartment, a normal life. But sometimes, when I'm driving a dark road at night, I'll catch myself holding my breath as my headlights sweep across the trees, and sometimes, just for a second, I think I see something move, something tall with impossibly wide shoulders. I know what I saw that night. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a man in a suit, and it wasn't my imagination. What I can't figure out is why it was standing so close to the road. Was it crossing when our headlights caught it? Was it curious about human activity, or was it waiting for something? Waiting for someone to stop, maybe. I'm glad we didn't stop. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had. Would it have disappeared into the trees? Would it have approached the truck? I'll never know, and I'm okay with that. The bighorns hold their secrets well. What we saw that night is still out there, I'm sure of it. Moving through those ancient forests, watching, waiting. I just hope our paths never cross again. Every now and then, I check the local Wyoming papers online for any strange sightings in the area. There have been a few reports over the years, nothing definitive. But the descriptions are always the same. Tall, massive shoulders, brown fur with that strange silvery quality. I know what we saw, and I know I'm not the only one who's seen it.